Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing great. This is in Marvel I Am God. Were Endless transmigrated the timeline of Wolverine 3 and became the last mutant of the old era. At the moment, the X-Men have long since disbanded, Mutant is no longer brilliant, Wolverine is entering old age, and the entire race is in peril. Fortunately, he found that when he watched battles he could obtain the opponent's abilities. So let's start this story, relax and enjoy. Battle detected, reward, Kryptonian bloodline, Superman. Although when the copy ability was activated, the voice that sounded in my head did not have the slightest tone, and it seemed very cold. But when Endless thinks back at the moment, he thinks how that voice is recalled, how pleasant it is. Now he has actually obtained the Kryptonian bloodline. For a while, looking back, Endless felt a little surprised. But if you think about it, it makes sense. It is estimated to have something to do with Clark's potential to burst out. Endless pondered. Meanwhile, the remnants of the sun in the sky have not completely set, and they still sprinkle their last bit of afterglow into the world. At this moment, although Endless' whole person is shrouded in dust, he can still feel the temperature from the sun. Having already obtained the Krypton bloodline, he immediately felt a great change in his body. Endless is now just through the dust curtain, facing the remnants of the sun that has become fading West Mountain, and can still feel that his body is constantly strong. All parts of the body, skin, muscles, fascia, bones, internal organs, are frantically absorbing the luster of fixed star, and the huge energy contained in it. Everything in Endless' body, all in every corner, is rapidly evolving every minute. Moreover, he can also feel that there is no end to such evolution. As long as there is a fixed star shine on him, this feeling of continuous strength will not stop. This is the wonder and horror of the Krypton bloodline. Can grow infinitely. This is also one of the goals of Endless Strip. Although there is only one period in the previous Supermasters that has avenued the existence of the almighty universe. But in this universe, the super ability is currently enough for both the Marvel Universe and the DC Universe. After all, no matter which side of the two sides exists, there will be no cosmic god-level enemies for the time being. On the DC Universe side, Batman is still young, Superman is even a student, and there is still a long way to go before the destruction of the Sunrise 520. Darkseid's arrival is even more distant, and that was all during the Justice League period. As for the Marvel Universe, before Thanos gathered the infinite gems, almost no one was his opponent except for the hidden old monster like Odin Ancient One. Thinking of this, the corners of Endless' mouth slowly outlined a satisfied smile, and slowly walked out of the dust and fog. At this moment, like Clark, under the sun, his strength is constantly growing. The other side. Bird looked at the figure walking out in front of him, narrowed his eyes slightly, and his gaze flickered and hesitated slightly. He was keenly aware of the huge amount of change in the other party. After Endless appeared in his field of vision, he was constantly getting stronger every minute. This feeling had only appeared in his own body before. Could it be that? Clark's eyes changed, and a surprising guess suddenly appeared in his heart. That is, Endless copied his ability from the bloodline and can continue to become stronger. When he had this idea in his heart, Clark was taken aback by himself. Think about it. There are only two possibilities for such changes to happen on Endless today. One is that Endless himself is also an existence that can continue to become stronger in a short period of time. Second, the other party copied his own bloodline ability. And in either case, in Clark's opinion, endless is enough to be called a terrifying existence. In any case, you have to be right. A person with such power must not harbor the idea of hurting others. Otherwise, everything will become a terrible disaster for this world. Clark thought, and the expression on his face began to become more and more gloomy. There is no way. After such a discovery, the pressure Endless gave him was too terrifying. And Endless felt Clark's attention and understood the other party's thoughts to some extent. Reluctantly shook his head and smiled gently. This big super. Sure enough, it's simple. Clark. Thinking, Endless stood in front of the billowing smoke screen, moved his hands and feet, twisted his neck. Let me teach you a good lesson. The voice just fell. Endless' feet gradually lifted off the ground, and the whole person floated. Meanwhile, in his eyes, a crimson shimmer suddenly bloomed. The surrounding air suddenly began to heat up rapidly at this time. Wisps, like substance, suddenly diffused out of Endless' body. Endless. Clark looked at this scene and immediately understood that the other party was going to use the ability to copy the past from himself, heat sight. Although there was no problem in the chest at all, it began to feel an inexplicable dull pain. It seems to remind Clark that his new awakening ability, the first goal, is also his own fact. Then, let you be the first person to use my hot sight. Clark let out a low roar deep in his throat, and his emotions were obviously aroused by the scene in front of him of Endless preparing to use the heat sight. Suddenly, Clark's pair of eyes also began to shine brilliantly red. The momentum on both sides has suddenly increased at this time. Before they even made a move, the two people had already begun to clash, which was a confrontation of momentum. Boom! The temperature of the surrounding air for hundreds of meters suddenly rose at this time. It's clearly late autumn, but the temperature in the air is higher than summer. Rumble. Next second, a crimson beam of light carrying surging power suddenly burst out of Endless' eyes. Tearing through the air, like two indestructible red spears, bursting out with earth-shattering might, fiercely shooting. Not to be outdone, Clark saw this. Rumble. The eyes burst out with endless red beams. In the air, even rounds of red energy fluctuations can be seen with the naked eye, and the air is trembling. Boom! One by one, the beams on both sides instantly collided, erupting with an earth-shattering roar. All the air around me is shaking suddenly. Where the beams collide, endless heat is instantly generated to sweep and rage, and the power caused by the collision shakes the ground. The two did not give in to each other, and the place where the beams collided was like a splash of water, and a round of crimson energy ripples frantically spilled out towards the surroundings. Those ripples are just a little scattered energy that spills out when the two sides meet. However, it is these energies that are constantly spreading farther and farther, stirring up rounds of strong winds and blowing away into the distance. Endless and Clark just collided like this, causing a strong wind to blow out of thin air within a radius of tens of kilometers. And around the collision point of two comparable red beams, the temperature instantly climbed to an extremely terrifying point. The trees placed in between, after a few seconds of deadlock between the beams on both sides, there were actually many dry leaves and dead branches that were slightly curled and carbonized because the temperature in the air was too high. Endless. Clark looked at the heat gaze that was stalemated between the two sides, completely comparable, and his heart shook. Obviously, he could already suppress Endless just now. Where do you think, just after such a while, the other party has actually reached the point where he can be equal with himself? Clark really can't imagine giving Endless some room to grow. So what a terrifying point will the latter grow? And at this time, Humph! Endless, who noticed Clark's mood, suddenly snorted coldly, and the beam of light in his eyes suddenly became more turbulent. The situation has suddenly reversed. Boom! The red beam in Endless' eyes suddenly increased several times, and it actually collided with the heat eyes on both sides little by little, suppressing Clark's position. How come? Clark watched the situation suddenly change, and felt the pressure from the other party, climbing sharply. He gritted his teeth and almost used all his strength, and he couldn't resist it. Endless' beam of light is still approaching him. Clark, it seems that you still can't do it. Endless looked at the other parties struggling, made a verbal provocation, and spoke coldly. At the same time, the body floating in the air is constantly approaching Clark, looking at the latter condescendingly. Ah! When Clark on the other side heard these words, he suddenly roared out angrily, trying to burst out with more powerful power. Boom! In the next moment, the red beam shot out of Clark's eyes suddenly became more turbulent, faintly leveling with Endless' beam, or even surpassing. Time. The temperature in the surrounding air has risen sharply to a higher level. Within a few dozen meters next to it, those dried leaves that were originally just uncurled were suddenly directly ignited into flames. Is it still just that? Endless watched Clark erupt, and also began to feel a little pressure, and then his eyes froze and suddenly spoke. Rumble! Endless actually broke out into an even more fierce offensive again. The red beams of light shot out of the eyes are more turbulent, and under the skin around the eye sockets, dense blood vessels are highlighted. Those protruding blood vessels glowed red, and it seemed that what flowed inside was not blood, but lava. Rumble! Endless' hot gaze suddenly overwhelmed the other party again. Bombard Clark's hot gaze and approach him at the same time. Ultimately. Rumble! Clark lost the power to resist, the red luster in his eyes suddenly dimmed, and the whole person was directly blasted away by the heat sight on the opposite side. The whole person lost control and fell to the rear. His body was like cutting wheat, after washing into pieces of woods. He fell to the ground fiercely, smashing the ground within a radius of 100 meters and suddenly collapsed, full of cracks. The ground was as if it had been smashed with an extremely terrifying hammer, and it trembled. Smoke and dust. Endless still stayed in place, looking at this scene, but he couldn't help but start to sigh in his heart. This is the ability that Kryptonian blood brings. Or maybe it's the bloodline of Dakeo. A very different lineage from other Kryptonians. Clark is a naturally born baby born by their parents through normal pregnancy. Perhaps, the reason why he has unlimited potential is related to this. Other Kryptonians have been genetically edited to define their lives before they are born. What kind of work can be done in the future, completely determined by genes. And Clark has an infinite life. He carries the entire gene pool of Krypton. Thinking of this, Endless couldn't help but start thinking about Zero. After copying ability before, Dakeo and Wolverine's super ability have superimposed. So what kind of concept would it be if the Day of Destruction was added to Dakeo? Truly limitless potential. And you can quickly enhance your ability and achieve the effect of infinite evolution. After this possibility comes to mind, Rau's Endless can't help but be a little moved. And at this time, on the broken ground shrouded in dust and mist, Clark shook his body and stood up with difficulty. Experienced the impact of Endless' hot sight just now, plus the blow of another failure. At this moment, Clark's eyes were bloodshot and red, covered with dense bloodshots. No, it can't be. It's not just the upper limit of my potential. He didn't care about the dust curtain floating around him. Supervision urged. His gaze directly passed through the dust and fog, and he crossed a distance of thousands of meters to lock on Endless, who seemed to be thinking in midair. Roar! Roar! Clark looked at the teenager who had copied his ability. His heart gradually quickened, and Roar sucked heavily. Since his ability comes from me, since he can achieve such a point, his strength can improve so fast. Well, so can I. He first murmured, then his tone gradually became intense. My limit is more than that. Clark's last voice was a roar in a roaring tone. The momentum on his body, accompanied by his words, climbed sharply little by little, until the last word blurted out. Boom! Clark's body suddenly erupted with extremely powerful power. All the air around him rippled out of thin air. His whole figure rose even more suddenly, turning into a residual image that ordinary people could not see clearly with the naked eye, and directly burst out at a speed beyond the speed of sound, rushing towards Endless. Endless! Clark stared at Endless, his eyes cracking. Looking at the spotless young man's face, there was only one thought left in his heart: then I will bring you down. I'm going to prove I'm right. I'm going to prove that I have that ability. Boom, boom, boom. Clark burst in front of Endless in an instant, and the air behind him erupted with bursts of explosions out of thin air, shaking the ground. Endless! Clark roared and slammed into Endless, and then stretched out his hands to hold the latter and not let go. At this moment, he directly urged his power to the extreme. Rushed in one direction. Clark! Are you still clinging to that unnecessary thought? 39. Endless was hugged by him and spoke in a deep voice. The next moment, he saw Clark's grim expression, opening his mouth to growl, but he couldn't hear what the latter was yelling. There was only a sharp explosion after breaking the sound barrier. Because at this moment, Endless was held dead by Clark, impacting in one direction, and the speed had completely exceeded the speed of sound. Clark was behind Endless, and the voice could not reach Endless' ears at all. At such a speed that is often indistinguishable to the naked eye of 3.0 people, the two sides turned into a blurry afterimage and instantly crossed the sky over the metropolis. Disappear in the blink of an eye. Above the metropolis, the sea of golden clouds belonging to the evening was suddenly torn in half by life, rolling and lining up on both sides. A sharp sonic boom fell from the sky, causing everyone to look up in confusion. Next second, a gust of wind blows and sweeps to every corner of the metropolitan city. A lot of clothes that were dried outside, as well as other scattered small things, were taken into the air. Half a minute later, an endless desert where the setting sun has just touched the horizon. A poisonous snake lurking under a stone is swallowing its tongue core, staring at the lizard crawling in front of it. Swish! It suddenly burst out with terrifying speed, swallowing the lizard directly into its mouth, piercing its fangs into the latter's body and injecting venom. After a while, the lizard stopped struggling and lost its life. The viper is about to raise its head and swallow its freshly captured prey. Suddenly, it heard a sharp sonic boom sound from high in the sky, and looked up. I saw that high in the sky, the air rippled. Farther away on the desert, there was a terrifying wind, setting off a sandstorm, with a huge momentum, swept rapidly. Boom one by one. Next second, high in the sky, two figures fell fiercely towards the desert. These two figures are Endless and Clark. When they fell, they did not slow down at all. Everywhere I passed, the wind was blowing, and there was a sound barrier all around. Seeing the ground getting closer, Clark's eyes froze, and it was actually the rebirth that sped up a little. Rumble. The two smashed into the desert surface at the same time. The surface rock formations were washed away by a terrifying impact, and the gaps spread everywhere, provoking the splash of rock debris. Roar. In the sharp tearing air sounds, two figures above the sky rapped in speeds beyond the speed of sound and told the flying coming. At an altitude of thousands of meters, a round of sonic booms was triggered, creating a circle of air fluctuations like ripples. The clouds of the entire sky were torn apart from the middle and stirred fiercely. Clark, you should know that things in the world will never be as good as people want. Endless braved the sound barrier generated behind him, and his eyes flickered to look at the resolute face that was close at hand. He felt the fluctuating and tangled mood in the other party's heart, so he spoke up to guide it. After Clark heard Endless' words, his eyes moved, his gaze flickered obviously, and he didn't know what to think again. Then, he frowned and accelerated violently. Directly improve your already extreme speed. Rumble. Suddenly, the two who had already told Flight that the speed of moving forward had increased by another level. 3 white sound barriers have been broken through around the body. Endless and Clark, but in a blink of an eye, they have come to the sky over New Mexico. 1. Then when I came to a wilderness, smash it towards the ground. The ground within a radius of several hundred meters was directly smashed and collapsed, and countless surface rocks splashed everywhere. Boom! Suddenly, the ground around him trembled violently, and endless dust and fog lifted the sky. Countless animals on the desert that would only travel at night were so frightened that they crawled out of the shadows and fled into the distance. Boom! Suddenly, in the center of the dusty pit, there was a fierce collision sound. It was even more endless, and the fierce wind blew out from the depths of the dust and fog with powerful power, emptying all the flying dust in an instant. Then, it can be seen that in the depths of the big pit on the ground, there are 2 figures fighting madly. Between the 2 figures, they will burst out with an extreme sense of power, and each movement will cause the surrounding airflow to rotate, forming an incomparably strong airflow. Every time the fists clashed, it would create a roar that was enough to resound back and forth between heaven and earth, making the entire land tremble violently. As the 2 clashed, the ground on which they stood continued to collapse deeper. The smoke and dust around were all around, and with the strong wind of the 2 of them swinging against each other, they were all eliminated, and the cycle repeated. Boom! The speed of the 2 figures is getting faster and faster, the punching force is getting heavier and heavier, and the battle is getting more and more intense. At first, it can be said that it is difficult to distinguish between the 2 sides. It's just that as time passes, the remnants of the sun on the horizon gradually fade, and one of the figures begins to fall into the downwind. Rumble. Another figure grabbed the gap where the other party began to make mistakes, and threw out a powerful punch. All the air around him was violently pulled by his punch, forming a violent wind, and another figure that suffered a heavy blow flew out upside down together. The figure lifted his feet off the ground, and flew away in the distance like a kite with a broken line, accompanied by the fierce wind and dust around him. Boom! 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 The figure gradually fell, smashed a sand dune, and then bounced on the ground a few times, smashing out several holes full of cracks, and then landed heavily. Am I still inferior? The figure braced his hands on the ground, climbed up embarrassedly, and muttered to himself as if he was unwilling. This figure is Clark. After Endless copied his Kryptonian bloodline, he fell into the downwind again. It can't be like this. He stood up abruptly and muttered. However, the moment Clarify stood up, Endless, who should have been thousands of meters away, had turned into a high-speed blurry after-image and burst in front of him. Meanwhile, a white and slender hand with well-defined bones suddenly wrapped in countless wind currents, quickly reached out and pinched Clark's neck. Damn! Clark felt a terrifying force pass from his neck, and his feet gradually lifted off the ground. Endless' expression was calm. He lifted the other party into the air, looked at him, and slowly tightened the force on his fingers. Sudden time. Clark only felt a terrifying suffocation around him. Not only physically, but also mentally. You're still too weak. Endless said coldly. As soon as the words fell, he picked it up and smashed it to the ground. Rumble. The earth-shattering roar spread out between heaven and earth in an instant, and the whole earth trembled, and a thick dust and fog swept up into the sky. After a strong sense of weightlessness, Clark felt that his entire back had smashed to the ground. The terrifying aftermath suddenly transmitted along Clark's body to the ground below him. Sudden time. The land crumbled, and the dense cracks like cobwebs spread out in an instant. The underground rock layer was also at this time, unable to withstand the impact of huge amounts of, collapsed in an instant, flew around, and picked up from the ground. Endless. Clark, who was pinched by Endless and pressed to the ground, suddenly broke out and wanted to resist, but was shocked to find that he could not use his strength at all under the oppression of the other party. Clark, who noticed this, suddenly became more and more complicated under his eyes. Endless' ability is all copied by himself. However, in this situation, he is actually not Endless' opponent. Thinking of this, in the bottom of Clark's heart, a wisp of shock spread, and his expression changed greatly when he looked at Endless. Clark, no. Then, Endless looked at Clark, whose face changed, narrowed his eyes, and said softly. Followed by, the muscles on his body suddenly swelled and tensed, knotting like the roots of an old tree, erupting with terrifying power. Lift Clark in his hand again and throw it out fiercely. Rumble. Clark's entire burly and strong body turned into an arrow from the string at this moment, and it was uncontrollably smashed into the mountain made of layers of rocks in the distance. At the moment when his body came into contact with the mountain, it should be an extremely heavy and solid mountain, but at this moment, it is like a bubble that easily cracks and explodes. In the violent tremor of the ground, only endless rock fragments could be seen rolling and collapsing, burying Clark's entire body. Rolling one after another, like wolf smoke, smoke rushed out from the gap between the debris of the mountain to block a large area of the sky. Endless calmly looked at the scene in front of him. Although it can be said that Endless is heavy every time, he is not worried about killing the other party. Or rather, on Earth without kryptonite, there is no way to kill Clark. After all, he is a Superman with a super Kryptonian bloodline, and he has an indestructible body of steel. Definitely. Now on the Earth, he is not the only one with a body of steel. And now Endless. With the ability to replicate, he is on par with Clark not only in terms of strength, but also in terms of future potential. Even, because of the particularity of copying ability, Endless' potential is above the super. After all, he can copy infinitely. It is even possible to integrate bloodlines, such as Doomsday superimposed on Kryptonian bloodlines. If you can do that, you can't imagine what will happen. At that time, it doesn't matter whether it is the DC universe or the Marvel universe. No matter which parallel world, in terms of potential and the upper limit of the future, endless can become a top existence. Boom! At this moment, the pile of boulders that buried Clark exploded with a bang. Sure enough. Although at the moment, his body is covered with dust, all his clothes are almost torn, and he looks embarrassed on the outside, but in fact, his body has not received much damage. You. Clark stared at Endless with a complicated expression, an extremely complex luster flowing under his eyes, and he didn't know what to think about in his heart. Do you want to continue? Endless looked at each other with a smile. His eyes were like clear lake water, without many waves. As a matter of fact, he had no hostility towards Clark. And the latter, in the previous battles, can also feel this. Therefore, Clark, who has now almost reached his limit, only reacted at this time, as if the teenager in front of him had been saying words that attacked him. But the actual purpose is to help yourself reach your potential. And, indeed, Endless did it. Now Clark, not only has his strength reached a new level, but also awakened several new abilities. He's actually helping me. Thinking back to what he had just experienced, Clark couldn't help but mutter. The eyes that looked at Endless suddenly became more and more complicated. Because, the picture of this teenager easily pinching Jelemy to death before is still vividly remembered. Until now, although Clark's heart has vaguely felt that Endless' statement also has some truth. But before, Clark had always been insistent on not hurting others. Obviously, it is not easy to directly change the idea that has been maintained for more than 10 years in one day. So, he is now entangled, in a trance. Snap! Feeling the chaotic thoughts in his mind, coupled with the exhaustion of his body, Clark sat directly on the ground that was broken because of the battle just now. Then, there was a sound of footsteps in his ears. Clark looked up and saw Endless smiling and coming over to look down at him condescendingly. It's over. Endless smiled lightly and slowly spoke. Clark was silent when he heard this, and his thoughts were so chaotic that he couldn't find the slightest clue. What's right? He couldn't help but think. Then, all the things he had experienced before flashed before his eyes again. Clark's heart became more and more chaotic, and he couldn't find the slightest answer. The expression on his face also became depressed and annoyed. With Super Brain, he rarely has such emotions. Because he is very strong in managing his emotions. However, in these 2 short days, what happened turned into a torrent, impacting Clark one after another, and has maintained the 3 views for more than 10 years. This dazed experience made him extremely uncomfortable. Endless felt the other party's emotions, smiled slightly, and suddenly felt that Clark in this period was a little cute. There is no difference at all with the kind of ordinary big boy who grows up, sees more and more things, and then falls into confusion and can't find direction for a short time. In the world, except in the eyes of children, there is so much pure justice and evil. I hope you Clark understood this earlier. Thinking. Endless stretched out his hand and placed it in front of Clark. Clark was stunned, looked up at him, shook his head helplessly and grabbed the hand and stood up. This matter is not over, he said a little stubbornly. But I can't tell whether what I said refers to the correct definition or simply did not win Endless. I hope you can win me next time. Endless laughed. But subtly, it set the tone for Clark's words. The voice is over. Endless stopped staying, turned around and stood up, his figure turned into a residual image, and flew away in the direction of the metropolis. Clark looked at the sky from a distance, but in a blink of an eye, there was only the back of Endless, who was already a file size, stunned for a moment, and then also bounced up and fled into the sky. A few seconds later, disappeared into the New Mexico sky. Time didn't pass long. The remnants of the sun, which had been mostly submerged into the horizon, had disappeared. Click. Endless opened the door of his apartment and returned to his apartment. Not long after closing the door, he heard the door on the opposite side also open. Apparently Clark is back too. But Endless didn't care, and Clark estimated that he would be alone for a while to digest his gains and losses. Thinking. Endless went to take a shower and washed away the sludge, and he could see that although he had gone through a fierce battle, his body was blessed with a body of steel, and there was no scar. A clean dress. Endless sat on the sofa and thought. People panel, Endless. Ability, innate, small water control, dimensional transmission, ability replication. Batman, high-level martial arts, high-level flying darts skills. Wolverine, super self-healing factor, super strength. Charles, ability. Catwoman, high-level stealing. Jeremy 520, take control of Raiden. Superman, Man of Steel, super strength, super speed, heat sight, flight, creature stance. Bloodline, Krypton Superman bloodline. Endless eyes scanned back and forth on the panel, and the satisfaction in his eyes grew stronger, especially when he scanned the line of Superman ability. It can be said that now he has almost copied most of the abilities that belong to Superman. Especially the most important thing is to ensure that you have unlimited potential and unlimited Krypton bloodline, combined with other abilities. Now I only need a little more time, I can have a super average, even beyond the ability of super, and then it will be enough to face most crises. 5. Endless murmured, letting out a long sigh of relief, and his body relaxed slightly. Then, on the television in front of him, the news began to report. Today, the forests of the western metropolis have been inexplicably destroyed, destroying large areas of vegetation. The meteorological station was puzzled by the sudden strong wind blowing in the city, and they did not detect any warning. Behind the screen, the newsman reports on strange events happening in the metropolis today. There were witnesses who photographed the sky, and there were 2 trajectories flying in the air, but the photo was too blurry, and no one knew what the strange phenomenon in the photo was. With the news reporting faraway words. On the TV screen, an extremely blurry photo appeared. When Endless saw this, he immediately knew that the so-called strange phenomenon was the figure of him and Clark. However, it is estimated that ordinary people would never think that it was the two of us. When Endless saw this, he shook his head with a smile. Then, he saw Natasha Romanov's beautiful face. After the woman last contacted me, SHIELD is expected not to come back in the short term, but I don't know what they will do in the long term. Thinking, Endless stood up. On the DC Universe side, he has almost copied all the super-capable abilities to the side, and in a short period of time, it is estimated that nothing big will happen. He was going to go back to Marvel first and deal with the matter over there first. Thoughtful. Endless activated the ability of dimensional teleportation, stretched out his hand forward, and the space in front of him suddenly distorted, waving out many ripples. A dimensional portal immediately appeared in front of him. Meanwhile, in a luxury villa, inside the living room, a bald figure is sitting on the killing and watching the news about the devastation in the West. As the screen in front of him emerged, the images of the desert being severely damaged appeared one after another. The corners of the man's mouth were filled with an evil smile. If Endless were here, he would definitely recognize him. It's Lex Luthor. One of DC's villains. Maker of Doomsday. At the moment, Lex Luthor looked at the news, his fingers lightly tapped on the arm of the sofa, and an evil idea had already sprung up in his heart. The Marvel Universe and the DC Universe that Endless walked through, although in two different dimensions, do not overlap. But the time flow rate on both sides does reach a certain parallelism. At the moment, the Marvel Universe has just ushered in the night after the sunset has disappeared. Located in the headquarters of the Loose Wing building in Shield, Washington. Nick Fury frowned, sitting slightly anxiously in the office. On the computer in front of you, various materials are constantly scrolling. The light emitted by the screen illuminated his bald head like a black bitten egg. Since learning that Endless and his party entered New York, he has not been in a good mood for 2 consecutive days. Especially after knowing that the other party recognized Natasha Romanoff's disguise and understood that S.H.I.E.L.D. had paid attention to them. Nick Fury's restlessness went to a higher level. In his eyes, this mutant represented extreme danger that could threaten the entire United States and even the entire world. Now their position on Shield is still hostile and therefore does not cooperate. This made Nick Fury feel even more nervous. Endless and their continued stay in New York was a ticking time bomb for him that could explode at any moment. Once it explodes, it will cause irreparable consequences, even unbearable for everyone. Endless. What the hell do you mean? 35. Nick Fury's one-eyed eyes flickered, and his already dark face became more and more gloomy, and he muttered in deep thought. Although it is still unclear what Endless is motivated by. But what is certain is that the other side is rejective and antipathetic to official organizations. No one is afraid of obvious hostility, at least it is directly on the surface, and they can decisively choose the measures to deal with it. Nick Fury is now restless, unable to figure out Endless' thoughts. If these mutants were not prepared to take any extreme actions. But Shield took a radical arrest and then angered Endless, then the sinners became themselves. Blah blah. While Nick Fury was still meditating, there was a knock on the door. As soon as he looked up, he saw Phil Coulson push open the office door and walk in. Head, we haven't seen Endless for 2 days. The manor where they lived, our people were always watching, and all the other mutants showed up one after another. 35. But Endless' figure is nowhere to be found. Phil Coulson had just walked in the door and couldn't even wait to walk up to Nick Fury, he was already quick to speak. The expression on his face was very solemn, obviously feeling that something big had happened. In every direction of the manor, we have sent people to keep an eye on it 24 hours a day. It is certain that Endless has not left the manor, and has not even left the door of the villa inside. 5. Phil Coulson put the information he had gathered in the past few days on the desk in front of him and continued. What is that mutant named Endless trying to do? When Nick Fury heard the report, his brows furrowed deeper. Endless and his party entered the center of New York City with such fanfare, and it was impossible for them to imprison themselves. If so, there was no need for him to refuse Shield contact. Thinking of this, Nick Fury narrowed his eyes. You take someone into their manor and take a good look. He gave the order in a deep voice. I'm afraid that Endless is engaged in some unknown conspiracy. Yes. Phil Coulson answered the order, then turned and walked away. He had the same suspicions as Nick Fury. He couldn't help but be anxious. Meanwhile, drenched manner. In the villa. Inside one of the rooms. In the quiet and dim room, the space suddenly gave birth to sparkling ripples like water waves. A spatial passage opens. Then, Endless walked out of it, down to earth, and the passage disappeared. He looked at the familiar room and took a deep breath. He's back. It's only been 2 days, but I always feel that everything is completely different. 99. Endless looked at his palm and muttered. However, the words that came out of his mouth were not only exclamations, but also facts. This time, Endless only spent 2 days in DC World, but he gained a lot. The whole person can even be described as reborn. Endless, who has copied the bloodline of the great Super Krypton and most of his ability, can already deal with many crises in the current Marvel world and on Earth. In time, Endless will develop his strength to the peak level and march to a higher latitude, which is not worthwhile. After that, Avengers need to assemble to get through the Earth crisis. I am afraid that he alone will be enough to settle it. Knock. Then. There was a knock outside Endless' door. Click. Then the door was opened. I sensed it as soon as you came back. Charles slowly entered in a wheelchair, looking at Endless with a kind smile on his face. Welcome home. When the words fell, he did not continue to ask Endless where he had been in the past 2 days. After all, everyone has their own secrets. Although Charles can read all people's minds, he is the one who respects other people's secrets the most. Or, as someone who has survived for so long and has seen countless mutant, he doesn't care at all whether as a companion has some secret to himself. He has the ability of the mind and can sense the emotions of the other person. As long as the heart is still on the side, that's enough. When Endless heard this, he also smiled. Good evening, Charles. Logan, have they been going lately? Everyone stayed in the manor for the past 2 days, and they didn't go anywhere. Charles thought for a moment and smiled slowly. Without you, the little ones don't dare to run around. 5. Logan's words should be drunk in the bar not far from the manor by now. When the two people talk, their tone is gentle. Like an ordinary pair of grandchildren pulling home routines. Pedaling. Then. There was another rush of footsteps outside the door. I've only known each other for a few days, and there are 2 little guys who depend on you. Charles sensed the person running towards the room and smiled even more. Words fall. 2 large and small figures appeared at the door. Endless. Wanda held the door frame and saw Endless. Her sapphire-like eyes lit up slightly, and her little face suddenly flushed with excitement. Laura didn't say a word. I haven't seen you for 2 days. Where have you been? Wanda came over and stared up at the latter. I went out and did some things. Endless responded. 35. Wanda didn't ask much, just nodded. After all, she knew that Endless' identity was special and she had a lot to do. Laura glanced up at Wanda and glanced at the other's loose pajamas with some dissatisfaction. Take note of this. She frowned impassively and put her small chin on Endless' shoulder again. His eyes were startled. I don't know what I'm thinking. Ha! Charles chuckled and continued, everyone has been staying in the manor for the past 2 days, and they all feel a little stuffy. If you come back and have nothing to do, you can take a few kids out for a walk. Hearing this, Endless put down Laura and nodded. There is no problem. With his current strength, even if he goes out because not many people can stop him. Wanda reluctantly let go of her hand when she watched Endless' movements. Until the back of hearing him behind. Both girls immediately looked happy. Great. I haven't even seen New York yet. Thank you, Endless. Wanda jumped and hugged Endless. Behind Laura stared at her back, the corners of her mouth that had just been hooked, and she didn't seem so happy. Then, pedaling. A slight sound of footsteps suddenly sounded from Endless' ears. The footsteps of the walkers were very light, obviously professionally trained, but Endless, who had Kryptonian blood and keen five senses, still captured the sound. At the same time, the ability of the mind that he possesses also perceives a burst of hostility. Endless' eyes suddenly froze, and his body tightened. Someone sneaked into the manor. What's wrong? Wanda noticed Endless' change and obediently let go of his hand. There are guests coming. Charles next to him also perceived hostility. Bang! Logan's figure ran in through the gate and pushed it open. Guys! Get ready. When I entered the manor just now, I saw S.H.I.E.L.D's car. Damn it. They must have come for us. At first, he thought that Endless had not returned yet, and shouted as soon as he entered the villa hall. Then his nose moved, and he noticed Endless' smell. Logan's eyes lit up. A few steps to the door of Endless' room. Endless, so you're back. He saw that Endless' face had darkened. What are we going to do now? Logan asked in a deep voice. At the moment, he already had some trust in Endless. I wasn't angry that I was being targeted again after coming to New York. It seems that Nick Fury didn't recognize the seriousness of the matter. Endless squinted slightly, his gaze flashing dangerously, and muttered. Then, he looked at the others present and smiled a little relaxedly. Don't worry, just let me solve it. Since I brought you here, I will ensure that you will be safe. Said. Endless set his eyes on Wanda and Laura, and his tone was not hurried. I'll take you to the amusement park tomorrow. 5. He was talking. Charles and Logan were stunned for a moment. Having experienced countless winds and waves, they felt something completely different. Even in such an emergency, it is inexplicably reassuring. It seems that Endless in front of him has completed some kind of sublimation. Endless, what must have happened in the past 2 days of disappearance? Logan wondered sharply in his heart. The other side. Endless finished his words without hurry. Endless. Wanda looked at him, her eyes wide with concern. Laura came over and tugged at his sleeve as well. It's okay, don't worry. Endless said softly. The voice fell. Rise. His figure suddenly flashed, turning into a vague after-image and disappearing in place, leaving only a strong wind hovering in the room. Half a minute ago. At the western wall of the estate. Several figures in black uniforms, cautiously holding daggers, almost stepped on almost silent steps. Approached Kim and arranged guards by the wall. Home. Several black figures circled around at the same time, and they were instantly embarrassed. Covering his mouth, the dagger flickered with cold light, cut the throat, and made it in one go. Outside the western wall of the manor, all the bodyguards died silently at the same time. And those figures, at this time, turned into the manor wall. These people are the contingent of SHIELD. Each one is a top special forces full of various abilities. And while they sneaked into the manor, outside the estate, not far away, in a shiny black SUV, Phil Coulson stared at the picture on the screen in front of him with a serious expression. The footage playing in front of him was captured by the camera on the helmet of those contingent men. He looked at these contingent men, getting closer and closer to Endless Manor, his eyes narrowed slightly. Scatter, pay attention to each other. This manor is inhabited by the most dangerous mutant. You must be very careful not to alarm them. Phil Coulson's hands clasped together and whispered instructions to the contingent man. Boom! Just as he was looking at the screen intently, one of the perspectives suddenly shakes violently, and then heads up towards the dark sky. You can see through the lower edge of the screen that a pillar of blood is squirting into the sky, and then it turns into a rain of blood and falls. Soon the entire camera was dyed red, and the picture became red. Phil Coulson saw this scene, his pupils contracted, and Raw sucked. Someone died. And everything happened only in an instant. The dead contingent members, without resistance, died quietly. He even suspected that the task force member had not been able to react at all. Damn! What the hell is going on here? Where is he? Next second. With someone dying. You can see that on the screen, all the first-person view pictures began to rotate frantically, as if looking for the person who just shot. The members of the contingent also began to curse eagerly. One of the images paused at the Sondermundogman, who had just fallen to the ground. When Phil Coulson saw the corpse on the screen, his heart couldn't help but stop. I saw the corpse that fell on its back, all the flesh and blood and trachea at the throat disappeared, and there was a big gap in the neck. The blood under him flowed and stained the ground red. Tear your throat in an instant. This is obviously not killed by the ability of the mind. But apart from the ability of the mind, no one in Endless Group seems to have this kind of ability. Phil Coulson wondered. Meanwhile. Another scream. One of the pictures suddenly went black. On the screen, all the shots shake, lease, and turn in unison to the second-place decedent. It can be seen that the second dead contingent member, with his head and helmet, was violently shaped by something. Blood flowed all over the place. See this scene. On the screen in front of Phil Coulson, all the camera on the head of all the task force members, the footage back, paused. ##. All the pictures turn in one direction. There stood an Oriental boy with a well-proportioned figure, a beautiful face, blood stains on his hands, and calm eyes. Hit. 5. Fuck, 35. Phil Coulson heard the members of the task force through the screen, and while they roared, everyone raised their guns. However, it has not yet been fired. The next moment, the figure of the Oriental boy in the center of all the pictures suddenly flashed, turning into a blurry after-image and disappearing in place. Subsequently, one by one, the pictures began to suddenly turn black. Phil Coulson stared at the picture, his eyes wide open, and he couldn't see where the person was starting. I can only watch the picture as a member of the contingent falls every second. More than 10 seconds later. Swish. The last remaining contingent member was so frightened that he threw his gun directly, turned around and ran. But I haven't taken 2 steps yet. Poof. On his helmet, the camera shot back suddenly paused. Phil Coulson, who was staring at the screen, jumped out of the corner of his eye. Seeing the camera footage taken outside, I began to slowly turn down the camera of the task forcer. One was photographed, from the back of his heart to his chest. That hand was stained all over his chest, pinching a heart that was still beating. Fuck. Phil Coulson sat in the car and watched this scene. His face was pale and scolded angrily, and the whole person couldn't stop shaking. Next second. By one. The arm on the screen withdrew from the contingent man's chest. Boom. Muffled sound. Phil Coulson's car shook suddenly, his eyes widened and he slowly raised his head, his pupils trembling. Something fell on the roof of the car. S.H.I.E.L.D. Triboloid Wing Building. Inside the director's office. Nick Fury was also watching the actions of the contingent men who had infiltrated the manor from a remote distance through the screen in front of him. Damn. Phil Coulson, what's going on? Seeing one task force member after another falling, he immediately asked Phil Coulson eagerly through the communication device. Nick. Fury's eyes flickered. There is a faint bad premonition in my heart, which is spreading rapidly. The other side. Drenched Manor is not far away. Black SUV inside. I don't know. In Endless Group, there should be no such ability mutant. Phil Coulson looked at the screen in front of him, one after another blacked out of the task force first-person view, and the whole person seemed nervous. So replied. Damn. 99. When he saw the last member of the task force who was about to escape, he turned around, and was pierced through the chest from behind. Phil Coulson couldn't help but scold in his throat. Immediately, he took off his headphones and prepared to give the order to the others when he began to evacuate. Boom! On the roof of the car he was riding in, there was a sudden muffled sound, and the entire body shook violently. Shouldn't. Phil Coulson suddenly felt that something was wrong, his pupils contracted, and his heart thumped in his chest. The task force members sitting around him immediately lifted their guns and got out of the car after the body shook. Swiftly raise your gun and aim at something on the roof of the car, with horror written on your face. Really? Phil Coulson saw the look on their faces through the car window and vaguely guessed something. Next second. Bang! The roof of the car on his head suddenly bulged, and then tore it, and a blood-stained, five-fingered slender hand penetrated the roof of the car, pinched the back of his neck and was directly lifted. Everything happened very quickly. Before Phil Coulson could return to his senses, he saw a flower in front of him and bathed in the night breeze. You're endless. He quickly came back to his senses, staring at the pair of ancient black eyes in front of him, and reacted to what the thing that had just smashed on the roof of the car was. It's endless. I warned you not to mess with me, or you won't know what will happen. Endless' expression was gloomy, and his voice was cold. It seems that you are not sensible. Smell. Phil Coulson suddenly felt like he was in an ice cellar, and the moment he met Endless' eyes, he seemed to face the demon Satan, and the majestic fear came to drown him alive. You calm down, calm, it's all a misunderstanding, everything is a misunderstanding. He swallowed his spit with difficulty, only feeling that Raw could not suck smoothly, and it was difficult to speak. Phil Coulson is terrified. Obviously, before coming, he had already made 520 mentally preparations. But they never expected that Endless would be beyond their imagination. He looked at Endless on the opposite side, his teeth trembling. Endless, don't be impulsive. We will never cross the line again next time. The communicator on Phil Coulson's chest also wore Nick Fury's voice. Endless realized that the latter was also paying attention to the scene. He said coldly, I have already given you a chance, but it's a pity that you don't know how to cherish. The voice just fell. Endless' eyes suddenly glowed red, and the temperature around him rose sharply. At night, two red beams of light swept by all the surrounding S.H.I.E.L.D task force members. The upper body was instantly blasted out of ashes by the beam of powerful energy. All the vehicles listening to the side were also swept over and subjected to the impact of high temperature, instantly producing a violent explosion. Rumble. The fire is everywhere, and the thick smoke of gunpowder is billowing and tumbling. S.H.I.E.L.D Triboloid Wing Building. Boom. Nick. Through the camera clipped to Phil Coulson's glasses, Fury received the tragic picture of the scene in front of his eyes. So angry that he stood up and slammed his desk up. As for the pictures representing other people, they have become snowflakes without a signal source. Damn. This Endless no wonder disappeared for 2 days. He's got a new ability. His already dark face became more and more gloomy at this moment. This mutant is getting stronger and more dangerous. Then, Nick Fury, the one who makes a mistake, deserves to be taught a lesson. Endless's voice came out of the picture in front of him again. Please spare me. There's also Phil Coulson's fearful struggle. Next second, Nick Fury saw the screen, the picture shook, and then Phil Coulson fell to the ground in embarrassment. His glasses have disappeared and have apparently been taken into the hands of Endless. The camera on the glasses was still aimed at Phil Coulson, and then one foot was on his chest, exerting gentle force. Ah! Phil Coulson immediately let out a violent roar, and his whole face was distorted. As long as you release Phil Coulson, I promise I won't have any trouble with you in the future. Nick. Seeing this scene, Fury immediately shouted eagerly. Endless, trust me. He looked at Phil Coulson's distressed expression on the screen and added anxiously. Nick. Fury intercedes for Phil Coulson because the latter is his only trusted partner. As the director, he also knows that the fish and dragons in S.H.I.E.L.D are mixed and powerful, and he can't trust others. And, Phil Coulson followed Nick Fury has followed all the way to the position of director for so many years. The two are not only ordinary colleagues, but also close friends. Nick Fury naturally takes it very seriously. Since your SHIELD director is begging for mercy, then I'll think about it. Endless's voice came from behind the camera again. After he said this, he quickly fell into silence. Endless seems to be really caught up in thought. Nick Fury stared solemnly at the screen, never leaving his foot on Phil Coulson. He had a bad premonition in his heart. It feels like the other person doesn't intend to fulfill their promises. Sure enough. Next second. Sorry, after thinking about it, I still can't let him go. With endless indifferent words, he sounded. On the screen. The foot that was stepping on Phil Coulson's chest suddenly burst into force. Click. Poof. 35. Phil Coulson's chest was directly trampled into it, and all the internal organs of his bones were crushed to pieces. He spewed out a mouthful of blood, his eyes widened, and his eyeballs were bloodshot, as if he had lost his life. Fuck, Endless. What do you mean? Nick. Seeing this scene, Fury's eyes suddenly hurt, and he roared and roared. On the neck and temples, dense blood vessels suddenly appeared. You're provoking me. You'll pay for it. Pay the price. His tone was crazy, his fists clenched, and he smashed on the table in front of him. The roar can be heard from 3 floors. Next second. Nick The picture on the screen in front of Fury suddenly turned and Endless's face appeared. He pointed the camera at himself, his expression calm and indifferent, as if looking directly at Nick across the camera. Fury. It's all your fault. 99. I said don't come and provoke me, or you'll pay the price. Endless's tone was flat, as if he was saying a trivial thing. Unfortunately, us.h.i.e.l.d are too arrogant and don't seem to take my words to heart. Like a fool, I know to regret it when I am hurt, but it's too late. With that, he paused a few times and continued, Nick. Fury, I'm not in the mood to bother with s.h.i.e.l.d right now. You'd better be obedient, or tomorrow it will be your entire s.h.i.e.l.d organization that will disappear. 35. Endless's tone was very calm from beginning to end, even if the words were threatening. But listening to only the tone of the voice regardless of the content is completely like saying a banal thing. The voice fell. Endless threw the camera in his hand to the ground. You guys quickly send someone to collect the body. There are so many corpses lying in front of the house, it makes people feel strange and uncomfortable. Between talks, Endless pressed his foot against the camera. When the last word was finished, he did not continue to give Nick Fury had room to reply, and the soles of his feet lightly forced. Click click. The entire camera was directly trampled into powder by him. Fuck. Nick. Fury looked at the picture of the signal loss on the screen in front of him, thinking back to what Endless said, and the anger in his heart was even greater. Another punch. Even smash the table in front of you, shape-shifting. Damn. He roared, boundless anger flowing under his eyes. That anger could almost be turned into substance and erupted from his eyes. Nick Fury hasn't been so angry in a long time. Especially since the other party is still a mutant, and he dares to threaten himself after killing his best friend. Endless, 35. Nick Fury gritted his teeth, and the tragic death of Phil Coulson and Endless' uncaring threatening words appeared in front of him. His fists were clenched, his chest, was heaving violently, and his face was cloudy. After a long time, Nick Fury barely managed to control his emotions, but there was still a thick gloom in his eyes. Hill, come and see me. He turned to the communicator and called out a name. It didn't take long. A tall woman with short and capable hair stood in front of him. The woman's name was Hill. Her blue eyes are deep, her facial features are three-dimensional, she looks beautiful and generous, but also exudes a heroic spirit, giving people a sense of being able and decisive. In fact, this woman is not only an excellent agent, but also has strong leadership skills. In later Marvel, even in Nick Fury then served as the SHIELD officer. Chief, are you looking for me? Hill asked. Phil Coulson had an accident at the Drenched estate in New York. I need you to deal with it. Nick. After a long period of anger, Fury looked unusually tired at the moment, and his voice was much quieter. However, the color of the haze under the eyes did not abate. Received. Hill replied. She could see that the other party's face was a little wrong, but out of a high degree of professionalism, she didn't ask too much. And Nick Fury raised his head and took a deep look at Hill. Keep an eye on that mutant named Endless, but don't touch him, and don't provoke him. What exactly to do about it, I'll think about it later. I will never let him go. When he said the last word, Nick Fury showed a faint feeling of gritting his teeth again. Yes. Hill glanced at his chief, saluted, and then retreated. At the same time, he was also curious about the mutant named Endless. Drenched manner. Endless returned to the room after solving the Shield man. Endless, you're getting stronger again. Logan saw the scene of Endless' hands in his eyes before, and his expression was very complicated. He probably knew what the other party was going to do the other day. That's a good thing, isn't it? Endless laughed. Endless, you're amazing, 35. As soon as his voice fell, Wanda on the side praised with adoration. Pete, who gathered on the side because of Logan's words just now, shook his body when he heard this, but he didn't dare to say anything. His fear of Endless deepened another level. It's a good thing indeed. Charles also laughed. Endless, I'm looking forward to the future you say more and more. I'm sure you can do it. Awesome. 35. At this time, Laura silently pulled Endless' sleeve and finally spoke weakly. When Endless heard this, he turned his head and looked at it, suddenly surprised. This was the first time Laura had spoken in so long together. It means that the little one is finally beginning to slowly get rid of the haze of the past. Thinking, Endless touched Laura's head with joy. The latter felt the warmth of his palm, quietly raised his eyes to look at him, and the corners of his mouth rose without leaking a trace. And Endless looked up at the night. It's just night, just enough to take everyone to the playground to play, and later, there will be firework in the playground. Good. Wanda burst into enthusiasm when she heard this, and Laura raised her head expectantly. Only Pete didn't dare to speak. He really didn't dare to hang out with Endless. Playground, my words, forget it, I'd rather go to the bar and have another drink. 35. Logan was also a little reluctant to go. Logan, it's hard to get out of the door, it's not good to leave the team alone. Charles admonished with a smile. The two girls also stared at him with big eyes of slight loss and expectation. Let's go together, everyone wants you together. Endless immediately laughed. Well, I lost. Seeing that everyone else was enthusiastic, Logan suddenly changed his attention. And if you think about it, he really hasn't been to an entertainment venue other than a bar for a long time. Just when everyone else was smiling. Only Pete couldn't speak with a strange face. But since everyone else was preparing to go, he didn't dare to say anything. Subsequently, each prepared for it. The group went out together and set off to the playground. The other side. S.H.I.E.L.D. Tribaloid Building Headquarters. In Nick. When Fury roared, the entire S.H.I.E.L.D. was guessing what had happened. Until the news of Phil Coulson's group being killed spread. The entire building was suddenly enveloped in a deep haze. Phil Coulson is one of the best agents in S.H.I.E.L.D. However, even he encountered an accident during the mission. Thus, how dangerous is the task they are performing? And Nick Fury after explaining Hill's mission. And I came to the basement alone. His eyes flickered, looking at the rows of drugs in front of him uncertainly, busy scientific researchers one by one, as if they were entangled. Until you close your eyes and see the scene of Phil Coulson's tragic death. Nick Fury opened his eyes again, and his gaze became firm. Let Phil Coulson participate in the Tahitian program. He spoke slowly. In the basement, the middle-aged man who looked like the person in charge of scientific research paused when he heard this. Are you sure you want to do this? The person in charge asked hesitantly. The Tahitian project is a realization project that can bring people back from the dead. However, the Tahitian plan is very unstable, and there may be many sequelae, and there may even be failure. Well, you go down first to arrange it, and when Hill agent brings him back, it will be executed immediately. Nick Fury said. Yes. The person in charge should be down immediately. And Nick. When Fury walked out of the basement, he took out a red and blue BB machine from his pocket with a gloomy face. This was left to him by Captain Marvel. When there is a major crisis on Earth, Raw can use this thing to call her back to Earth. It's not time yet. Nick Fury frowned and took it back in. Endless alone is a mutant, although the potential is powerful, but it is not worth wasting the opportunity to recall Captain Marvel at the moment. But don't worry, damn mutant. I will definitely make you pay a terrible price. I swear. Thoughtful. Nick Fury slowly clenched his fists, and the anger in his heart kept churning. The world's top super agent, at the moment, already has the idea of how to deal with Endless. It is bound to make the other party pay the heaviest price. Let him know that S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury are not easy to mess with. The night gets darker. The playground has just completed tonight's fireworks extravaganza under the gaze of countless visitors. The people who are constantly flowing leave the amusement field like a tide. The car in which Endless and others were riding was also in it. Endless, do you see it? The fireworks just now are really beautiful. Wanda opened the window, smelling gunpowder in the air, her blue eyes shining slightly. It was as if in her eyes, the previous fireworks were still reflected. Good looking. Laura next to him was also at this time, nodding her head again and showing excitement. Even Pete, who seemed a little repulsive before, is now like the other two children, with a rosy face and a smile. All three of them went to the playground for the first time in their lives. Today is definitely a memorial for them. Raw. In the last row, the elderly Charles was a little tired and had fallen asleep. The excited Wanda didn't get a response and glanced over to the seat. Only to find that Endless was also asleep on his side. No way. Before he returned to the Marvel Universe, he had a fierce battle with Dakeo. Before I could say a few words when I came back, I encountered Shield again. After experiencing such a thing, even if the body with the Kryptonian bloodline is not tired, Endless spirit is already tired. You guys control your sound and don't wake them up. Logan controls the steering wheel and looks through the rearview mirror at Charles, who is sleeping peacefully, and the three children with smiles on their faces. He glanced sideways at Endless beside him. Suddenly whispered to several children like a big parent. Good. Wanda and the others were also very well behaved, and after answering, they lowered their volume. But the smile on a few faces could not be stopped. Logan felt everything that happened at the moment, and for a moment he felt something. In a trance, he felt the stability and steadiness he had been pursuing from all the details that were happening at the moment. It's as if this life is what Logan has always pursued. No bloody fights, no speed of life and death. Just have fun with everyone and go home safely. So for comparison, those who are worried about the escape experience along the way cannot be called alive at all, let alone compared with life. I don't know how long this life can last. After thinking about it, Logan sighed secretly. He decided he had to cherish the moment. Yet at this time, boom! A violent explosion suddenly came from the front. Not only was the sound tumbling terrifying, but even the entire ground was visibly trembling. Logan felt all this and immediately slowed down his car. At the same time, he narrowed his eyes slightly. A few kilometers from where they were, they could be seen sputtering with fire, accompanied by thick black smoke. What happened? Logan wondered. Boom, one by one. The next moment, another terrifying explosion sounded. In the distance, in the burning place, there was a residential building several stories high that seemed to be hit hard by some terrifying existence, instantly covered with cracks, and then collapsed in an instant. Countless smoke and dust swirled and covered the sky. Countless people panicked, screaming and fleeing in all directions. Is something going around destroying at this time? Several children, after feeling all these changes, suddenly the smile on their faces suddenly converged. Wanda frowned, Laura withdrew her smile. It's over, it's not going to be the end of the world. 35. Pete was directly frightened into the six gods and masterless, and his face was pale. Ahead, there are indeed two things that I have never seen before, exuding powerful energy. Charles was also awakened by the sound just now, narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice. Fuck. It seems that I have to go another way, and this day is really uncomfortable. 35. Logan looked at the chaotic vehicles on the road in front of him, as well as countless pedestrians running around, and cursed secretly. Immediately ready to turn around and go another way. As for what might be happening ahead, he didn't care anymore. Logan, stop. Then. Endless also slowly opened his eyes, and there didn't seem to be any surprise in his eyes. This is New York, after all. New York in the world of Marvel is a place where big events can happen at any time. Countless characters gather here. It is not uncommon for events to occur at any time. For Endless, the person who can cause the incident must represent his ability to copy, which is useful. So he asked Logan to park. Endless. Logan first stopped the car, looked at Endless who opened the door and walked down, stunned for a moment, and then understood Endless' thoughts. Since you need it, I can't just let you go over. Said. Logan was ready to open the door and get out of the car. And at this time, Endless was about to say something. Boom! Another earth-shattering roar and explosion sounded, which reverberated out. Sound waves like substance exploded towards the position of several people, and everyone's bodies vibrated with it. Those passers-by who were already on the road, running and screaming wildly, became more and more crazy. For a time, the entire road looked over, and it was such a group of demons dancing, as if it had turned into a purgatory on earth. Endless. Logan was just about to say something. In the next second, another shaking mountain came with a bang, and the building complex in front of the road once again showed large-scale destruction. Tall buildings cracked, collapsed, smoke, and fire. Roar. This. The place where the explosion occurred was more and more pounded from Endless' location, but it was only more than 1,000 meters away. And in addition to the explosion, they finally heard other sounds. Roar. Not like the roar of a man, but the roar of a monster. Under the skyrocketing fire and endless smoke, there were two humanoid monster figures several meters high, fighting each other. They all have hideous and terrifying huge muscles, and they can burst out with terrifying power at will, creating extremely exaggerated destruction. Pavements, tall buildings, vehicles. Everything around them began to quickly turn into pieces and ruins. What the fuck are these two heads? The moment Logan saw the two-headed monster appear, he was stunned and his face was dull. The power displayed by those two-headed monsters is also too terrifying. Such a powerful physical strength. Is it really something that creatures can have? Even if Logan had super strength himself, he couldn't compare to them. It's the Hulk and the Abomination. Endless recognized the identities of the two huge figures. Immediately, I couldn't help but light up my eyes. I didn't expect him to encounter the Hulk story event. And it's also a scene where he and Abhor, two genetic monsters created by gamma rays, fighting each other to the death. Two powerful abilities, warring scenes. Isn't that when I replicate ability? Endless was immediately a little excited in his heart. This will be my best chance to replicate ability in the near future. The Hulk still has abomination powers. His eyes lit up. After all, his copy ability can be superimposed on each other. Both the Hulk and the abomination ability can be obtained at the same time, and then attached to Endless alone. Meantime, Endless has another expectation in his heart. I don't know if it can be copied to the bloodline ability that the more angry the Hulk is, the stronger the power. This is also a very buggy ability in the Marvel Universe. As long as the Hulk has more anger in his heart, the stronger he can become. And this becoming stronger is also the same as the Great Super Krypton bloodline, and it becomes stronger without an upper limit. Now that I already have a bloodline that can become infinitely stronger, I don't know if I can add another tonight. Endless' deep sense of anticipation is getting stronger and stronger. After thinking about it, he turned back to Logan and said, "Logan, you take Charles and the other children back first, you don't have to worry, I'm completely fine alone." Words fall. Endless could not resist the anticipation in his heart and walked in the direction where the Hulk and the Abomination were. It's just that he just took 2 steps. Suddenly, a figure above his head flew through the air and turned back. Then I saw a golden and red, flowing metallic luster, sparks spraying from hands and feet, and a high-tech figure exuding a high-tech meaning up and down, slowly falling in front of Endless. Blocked his retreat. This is Iron Man. Inside the car, Logan in the cab, or everyone else, looked up at each other. Tony Stark, as the limelight of the whole of America, even Logan and others have heard of him. Hey! I don't know what you think, maybe you're a reporter trying to grab a big story or something. But now that I'm here, you go back and save your life, understand? Tony under the mask. Stark was a little impatient, he was just at a party, he didn't expect that there would be 2 big guys doing things on the street. Now he is here to solve this trouble. And on the road in the past, I saw a passerby who wanted to give someone away, so I stopped him easily. Tony, I'm fine, please give way. Endless raised his eyebrows, but did not expect Tony Stark will appear at this time. Definitely, he didn't care. At this moment, Endless just wants to hurry over and copy ability. Are you, Endless? Tony Stark also recognized Endless, a partner brought by Mr. Wilson at the banquet 2 days earlier. He was actually not relieved at the time, after all, there were too many guests to remember them all. It wasn't until he saw each other again now that he had a little impression. Anyway, you stay here first, the 2 big guys in front are not something you can provoke. Tony Stark didn't dwell too much, whether he knew him or not, it wasn't worth spending too much time on himself. 0, asking for flowers. Then after an explanation, the thrusters on his hands and feet suddenly erupted with more powerful firelight thrust, accelerating towards the 2 big guys who were still fighting the sky. Raw. Right in the city at night. The roads, buildings, and vehicles within a few kilometers of the surrounding area have all been reduced to ruins in the battle between the Hulk and the Abomination. Fire, fog, dense cracks. Repeated terrifying power impacts. Even heaven and earth must follow the trembling roar together. Wherever the two big guys appear, wherever they appear, they will become hell-like existence under their aftermath. Moreover, with the war, the Hulk and Abomination are still on the move, constantly increasing the range of destruction. Hey! Two big guys, you have to stop me, and if you fight again, the whole of New York will have to be demolished by you. Tony Stark, as a steel battle suit, floated in midair and shouted warning at the two big guys below. The voice did not fall. The battle suit on his body, on his back, shoulders, and arms, suddenly opened the dense organ grid. Next second. Boom boom. Countless missiles dragged their tail flames from the lattice on their bodies, marked out different trajectories, and bombarded towards the two big guys in front of them. Hundreds of missile groups, like meteors in the sky, and dense raindrops like torrential rain, crashed down. Boom! A series of explosions spread out in the air one after another. Countless missile explosions caused explosions to gather together, connecting into a mighty sea of fire. It was clear that it was night, but everything around was illuminated as bright as day. 0. Meanwhile, with so many missiles exploding at the same time, even the entire ground is constantly trembling. The already cracked road, under this bombardment, I am afraid it will be directly unrecognizable. Sudden protrusion. At this time, the military helicopter, which had just been hovering high in the air, rotated its propeller and slowly headed towards Tony Stark came closer. On the helicopter, General Ross, dressed in military uniform, looked at the missiles that covered the two big guys at the same time, and suddenly felt a little anxious. Tony Stark. Don't hit that green guy, that's your own man. 99. He shouted anxiously, raw. Tony Stark heard this, watching the gradually dissipating explosion on the ground and the smoke that took its place. You didn't say it earlier. I'm afraid they're both slag now. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, his face was strange, and he raised his head and said to General Ross. However, it was in Tony. The moment Stark looked up. Rumble. The ground below shook violently and emitted a roar. A huge figure directly tore through the thick black smoke screen, wrapped in a strong airflow, and rushed towards Iron Man. The figure had lizard-like grey skin, hideous and terrifying muscles, and every corner of his body was covered with dense bone spurs. Its Abomination. After being bombarded by heavy missiles, it was unharmed, and even jumped directly towards Tony Stark strikes back. Tony Stark. 35. Although the Abomination may seem very hideous now, it has not lost all its sanity. Its behemoth leapt up towards Tony Stark, also hissed out the other party's name as he kept getting closer. Next second. Rumble. His huge body rose rapidly, wrapped in extremely strong air currents, and it was already like a cannonball, hitting the latter fiercely. The impact of terror even directly puts Tony Stark flung out. Damn. Tony Stark frowned and cursed secretly. Although there was a layer of steel battle suit, he could still feel the terrifying impact on his body. Wrapped in the Iron Man battle suit, he suddenly turned into a golden and red after image and flew all the way back. Boom boom. Rumble. Rumble. Suddenly. The sound of collision is incessant, and the ground is shaking one after another. Instead, the Iron Man flew upside down and crashed through several buildings in an uncontrolled row. Every building was left with a big hole filled with dust and fog, and it was full of cracks. And Tony. When Stark smashed into the building not far from Endless, he was able to stop being knocked out in the smoke and dust around him. Tony. When Stark stood up again in the steel battle suit, the place where his chest was hit by Abomination was already slightly shape-shifting. Even the surface of the steel battle suit has many places, because of the successive collisions just now, and many places have been rubbed off the painted paint. Looks quite embarrassing. Even if it's anti-Hulk armor in the back, Iron Man can't help the Hulk, let alone now. If you just let him face it, and the abomination of the Hulk at this stage, I'm afraid it's a little difficult. 35. Endless shook his head repeatedly as he watched this scene, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Then, his eyes lit up, and he lifted his steps and walked towards the place where the fire was filled with fire and rolling fog in the distance. Leave it to me. 9. Endless looked at the two huge voices, and his eyes lit up slightly. Boom. The night is getting darker, but New York at the moment is silent at all. The abomination that jumped into the air before, after crashing into the Iron Man, hit the ground again. More than several tons of bout heads smashed on the ground, directly smashing the already cracked ground, and then smashed a big hole deeply. The ground shook violently, thick smoke and dust billowed up, the surrounding firelight burst out, and countless distorted light and shadows swayed on the ground. Hulk. 99. As soon as the abomination fell, he suddenly stood up straight and hissed at the Hulk. The rolling sound wave tore a hole in the endless fire and dust in front of him, and his eyes suddenly locked on Hulk, and all the bone spikes on his body became sharper and sharper at this moment. Both of them are the products of human gamma rays, both are genetically mutated monsters, and they are old enemies of fate. Raw. 99. Hulk is several meters tall, under the green skin, all the exaggerated muscles like rocks, and the whole body is full of combat power, and there is a terrifying sense of oppression emanating from it. After the constant battle, the anger in his heart became more and more vigorous, his strength became stronger and stronger, and his reason gradually decreased at this time. He just wants to fight. Knock knock. Rumble. After receiving the provocation from the other party, Hulk directly took a big stride and stomped the ground trembling. Then suddenly exerted force, the whole person turned into a huge amount of green afterimage, heading towards the abomination and killing. Boom! The two huge amounts of their bodies collided together again. The terrifying wind suddenly spread away from the place where they collided, blowing countless gravel smoke. The ground was even more overwhelmed, crawling out more dense cracks. This is a clash between two fierce beasts on Earth. The other side. With the Hulk and the abomination, there are several locations where the big hole was pierced. Half of the building collapsed into rubble. Rumble. A golden red steel arm with a lot of its surface coating scraped off sticks out from the rubble. 520. Then that hand, press on the pile of stones, Tony. Stark suddenly came out of the inside and climbed out. On the steel battle suit, the two eyes emit white light, shining two pillars of light in the dust in front of them. Damn! These two big guys can be so tricky. Tony. Stark cursed. Even through the mask, I could feel the gloomy mood of his mood at the moment. Just as he got up, ready to continue dealing with the Hulk and the two big guys. Tony. Stark suddenly found that the eastern face that he had seen once at the dinner party before was still walking towards the place where the Hulk and Hulk were fighting. "Hey! Your name is Endless, right?" he suddenly shouted in the direction where Endless was, and the mask amplified his voice while rendering it a mechanical sound. "I don't know what you think right now, but the place in front is very dangerous. For the sake of your little life, you better get out of here quickly. In any case, the King and disguised Wilson has a long-term cooperation with the Stark Group. And Endless is also the other party's partner. So, Tony." Stark made his own reminder a second time. However, Endless Tony. Stark's successive prompts, familiar and unmoved. Still keeping his pace, he walked in the direction of the Hulk and the Abomination. As for Logan behind him, he took a cart of people to a place farther away that would not be affected for the time being, looking at Endless' back. Then, military helicopters at high altitude also lowered their altitude, closer to Tony Stark. General Ross, on the plane, also noticed this guy who was advancing alone while everyone else was fleeing for his life. "Who is this guy?" he couldn't help but ask his subordinates beside him. Hearing his question, everyone in the helicopter looked at Endless and were speechless. Apparently no one knew each other. Meanwhile, S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Director's office. Nick. On the screen in front of Fury, the scene of the battle between the Hulk and the Abomination was also captured through the camera on the street. He naturally noticed Endless' figure, and his face suddenly became gloomy. "Endless? Nick." The moment fury appeared in his eyes suddenly sharpened, and his face became more gloomy. A pair of fists clenched directly. "You guy, you really haunted. Just killed so many of my people, and now it's here again." He muttered, "What are you trying to do when you go up now?" "Copy ability." However, Hulk and Abomination, who are mad now, are not easy guys to mess with, and if you walk over, I am afraid that you will only be affected. I want to see what you are capable of. Dare to walk up. Nick. As Fury thought about it, his eyes became sharper. He has decided not to die with Endless, and will definitely face each other head-on in the future. And before dealing with a person, the most important thing is to know him as well as possible. However, the other party's ability has not been completely revealed in front of SHIELD. In addition to sending people to inquire, now is the best time to observe Endless' ability and combat power level. After all, what he was about to face now was the Hulk and the two terrifying monsters who hated it. Thinking. Nick. Fury's expression suddenly became serious, staring at Endless' back on the screen. Meanwhile, on the street near Times Square in New York. It should have been one of the busiest areas in the city. However, looking at the past at this moment, it is a mess everywhere, and fireworks are everywhere. Broken cars, collapsed buildings, shattered streets. Looking across the street, you can't even come up with a single intact shop. Boom! A huge grey fist intent suddenly broke through the air, triggering a huge amount of airflow around it, forming a violent wind. Pedal and pedal. Hulk's face was punched in Abomination, and suddenly the huge amount of his body lost his balance and took a few steps back uncontrollably. Rumble. It was smashed directly into the building behind him, with rubble splashing and dust and mist churning. Hulk. Seeing this, the hatred did not hesitate, and roared with a raging battle intent flowing under his eyes. As soon as he lifted his hands, he easily carried the 2 cars on his side that had been flattened. Rumble! Rumble! One after another, he smashed into the hole in the wall that the Hulk crashed into. A violent collision sound, coming backwards from it. Hulk! Abomination of doing all this, but still has no intention of stopping, ugly and huge amounts of the head looking left and right, as if looking for what else to smash over. Then it noticed that not far away, a small figure that only reached its crotch was slowly walking towards it. Initially, Abomination does not want to pay attention to this weak being. But just when he was about to turn around, he noticed the contempt and disdain in the other party's eyes. Roar! The Abomination was immediately furious, and roared out. All the spikes on the body are shaking wildly with this action. It has been pursuing great power all its life. And now the hatred, looking at the surrounding environment, feeling the immense power in the body, is naturally proud. However, it actually felt contempt for itself in the eyes of this Oriental teenager in front of him, who was not well proportioned. This Abomination cannot be endured. Find death. 5. After it roared, it immediately picked up a waste car with a flaming hood beside it, and smashed it towards the little guy in his eyes. Roar! Tons of scrap cars roared by. With the weight of horror. If it is an ordinary person, if it is hit by this, it will definitely be crushed into meat puree. Distance. Tony, who is rushing towards this side. Stark raised his eyebrows when he saw this. It's over, I don't know what this Endless thinks, he actually dares to run directly in front of such a monster. It seems that Mr. Wilson is changing partners. He shook his head and sighed. However, there was nothing he could do, after all, he had already persuaded Endless twice. The latter does not stop anyway. I can't blame myself for this. However, Tony Stark's thoughts just fell. In the air, 2 red beams of light wrapped in terrifying power suddenly swept through. The waste car that smashed towards Endless was immediately cut directly from the middle, cut into 2 segments, and the part at the cut seemed to be melted by lava, with temperature. 1 left and 1 right swiped through his body, not touching Endless at all. How is that possible? This guy turned out to be no ordinary person. Tony. When Stark saw this scene, his eyes jumped, and his heart was shocked. His eyes looked at the waste car behind Endless in amazement, and his pupils couldn't help but contract. How did he do it? High in the sky, General Ross on the helicopter was also shocked and complicated when he saw such an expression on his face. On the faces all around, a pair of eyes were constantly flickering, not knowing what they were thinking. The other side. S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, inside the director's office. Damn. This damn guy used this trick to kill everyone else. Nick Fury saw Endless use the heat sight again, and suddenly couldn't control his emotions. The picture of those contingent members being killed by the latter's hot sight once again appeared in front of him. This made him feel extremely angry. The expression of the whole person became fierce, and there was a bloodshot in his eyes. Endless. Go on. I'd rather take a good look at what other abilities you have besides these, 99. Then. Nick. Fury barely controlled the urge to smash the monitor in front of him. Such a sentence was squeezed out of the mouth. His eyes were even more locked on Endless. Times Square, New York. Hate to see the cut car, stunned, and then the corners of his mouth split, revealing a dense sharp tooth, showing a hideous smile. He had already become interested in Endless. This little guy also has a special ability, which can be matched as his opponent. Thereupon, roar! The ground trembled violently, and a huge figure drove the surrounding flames and smoke and swept towards Endless. The big guy is going to do something to Endless. Tony. When Stark saw this scene, he was immediately a little nervous, but his steel battlesuit affected the power transmission device 0. At the moment is repairing itself and simply cannot fly. Next second. Right in Tony. Stark looked anxiously. The hatred of a heavy truck has suddenly rushed to Endless size. A huge fist the size of an ordinary person had already been raised high by him. Smash it down. And then, rumble. The strong wind swept indiscriminately, and all the objects around were swept up. Endless smoke and dust rise and tumble. But I saw an extremely slender small hand that was relatively abhorrent to the fist, and easily blocked his punch. Roar! Abomination suddenly became furious, roared, and the muscles in his body suddenly swelled, bursting out with full strength. It's a pity that no matter how hard he exerts, the fist in front of him can't advance by half a point. Abomination. Too weak. Endless raised his hand and pressed the fist in front of him, shook his head and commented indifferently. Battle detected, rewarded, super strength. Then, the cold prompt in my head sounded at this time. Copy ability successfully copy the other party's super strength. Click click. Suddenly, in Endless' body, there was a crackling sound, and the muscles on his body expanded slightly. After all, he now has a super plus Wolverine super strength as a base. The abomination of super strength did not bring him a leap forward. But Endless estimated it. This ability copy also brought a third improvement to his overall strength, which is not bad. And opposite. Abomination fell into rage after hearing Endless' words. You said I weak. It roared wildly, and terrifying sound waves spread out from its throat-like substance. With the other hand, he directly held the street lamp on the side, and suddenly exerted force, and the entire street lamp was uprooted. Next second, Abomination directly raised the street lamp in his hand, and the hideous muscles of his body suddenly jumped at this time, smashing towards Endless. Then, Endless looked at the street lamp getting closer and closer. His expression was calm, and his eyes were not wavering. I don't seem to feel any pressure. Then, the hand pressed on the Abomination fist pushed forward. Rumble. Abomination didn't even have a chance to react, only felt a huge force from the fist down the arm. That huge force, powerful, turbulent, unable to resist. It was as if I had hit a steel wall that could not be shaken at all. The entire huge body of the behemoth was pushed out of an extremely long distance that could not be controlled at all. Washed away huge amounts of houses. For a time, the surrounding ground trembled. Endless dust and mist churning and spreading. At this time, one house after another collapsed. Looking at this scene, Tony Stark's shock in his heart was even more incomparable. The expression under the steel mask was already a little uncontrollable, with a bit of a sluggish feeling. What is the origin of this Endless? What a great power can there be in such a small body? 55. He secretly exclaimed in his heart, just a seemingly understated push, just directly blast such a big guy away. 3.0 The other side. In the sky. General Ross, who had been in the helicopter and was paying attention to the ground, had even more complicated expressions in his eyes. The whole person fell into silence. The super soldier studied by the military for so long is nothing compared to this teenager. How exactly did he do it? And in S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Nick Fury stared at the screen, his expression even more gloomy. Although he had already predicted in his heart before, the strength of this Endless must have exceeded his previous performance. However, after seeing that the other party can so easily confront, and even suppress, such a huge genetic monster, Nick Fury still felt the pressure. It seems that the plan to deal with Endless needs to be further improved. He suddenly fell into deep thought, and his eyes became more and more gloomy. If there is really no other way, then only. Just when everyone saw Endless' performance, they all had their own thoughts. You, strong Hulk, the Hulk who had been smashed into the ruins by Abomination, slowly crawled out of the ruins. Endless' performance just now was also seen by him. So after coming out, Hulk's gaze at Endless was full of excitement. Roar! He roared, an excited smile on his green face. Next second, Hulk roared, and actually took a direct step towards Endless. Two huge amounts of thighs hang hideous knotted huge muscles. Every step that falls, a deep pit will be stepped on the already fragmented ground, and the ground will tremble. The Hulk stared at Endless, and a warlike roar came out of his mouth. It's getting faster and faster. Both fists have been raised, aiming and smashing towards the opponent's head. Roar! The moment Hulk burst into a low roar deep in his throat, he had already arrived in front of Endless. All the muscles swelled and bounced, bursting with extraordinary power. A pair of giant fists have been raised high and smashed down again. Between all movements, you can bring a strong roar whistling wind, and endless airflow in all directions. Full of oppression. However, Endless stood in place, feeling the strong air pressure coming from the surface. His face did not move. Seeing the Hulk's fist grow bigger and bigger in his own eyes, he was suddenly pleased. Battle detected, reward, super speed. Battle detected, reward, super strength. When the copy ability took effect, an icy voice echoed back and forth in my head. Meanwhile, Endless felt the power in his body, increasing wildly. The forces that had previously been copied from different sources were superimposed at this moment. There was an additional intangible energy in the depths of the body, rushing towards the internal organs and limbs of the body at a very fast speed, and penetrating in. Endless is getting stronger at a rapid pace. Suddenly, the muscles on the body expanded slightly and tightened. He could feel that his strength had been greatly improved on the original basis, and the strength of his whole body was like a vast sea of stars. You can't see the edge at a glance. Endless is confident. Even Clark, who has the bloodline of Krypton, will take a lot of time to catch up with him. Furthermore, Endless also felt the world in his line of sight slow down and become clearer. Thanks to super speed, a copy of the Hulk. His reaction speed, also at this time, has been raised to another level. At the moment, the Hulk's fist was smashing towards him. But Endless can see the details of all the other party's movements in full view. It's just that the Hulk rushed over, and in such a short period of time, he copied the other party's ability, and his strength was promoted again. Roar! Next second, the Hulk roared again, and the fists that had already smashed down accelerated even more. Boom! The air where the fist passed, even because the speed of his shot was too fast, generated bursts of explosions. Rumble! Again in a blink of an eye. The Hulk's behemoth body was on his back and feet off the ground, leaping up. The open mouth closed heavily, and the uninterrupted roar just now was cut off with the closed mouth. Hulk, it seems that you don't see enough. Endless raised his fist high, looked at the Hulk in front of him who was bombarded by his own punch, and chuckled. Subsequently, he lifted his feet. Rumble. The Hulk had just been punched by Endless and flew up, his feet off the ground. I haven't had time to land yet. He was slammed in the abdomen by Endless. The airflow stirs, and the heaven and earth roar. The Hulk's entire behemoth body directly turned into a green cannonball and flew upside down towards the rear. Rumble. In the end, the Hulk's behemoth body flew backwards for more than 1,000 meters, and crashed down a building that was already full of cracks and crumbling, just as it fell to the ground under the collapse of countless collapsed stones. However, Endless estimated that the other party would not be harmed. He was scrupulous to his full strength, and maybe he would kill the Hulk directly. So it only used 1/10 of the force. Sure enough, the endless dust and mist raised on the opposite side were suddenly torn apart by a pair of large hands with green skin. Suddenly Rage's Hulk appeared in front of Endless size again. Roar. Being beaten one after another made the anger in Hulk's heart churn more and more, and suddenly roared. At this moment, the green muscles on his body suddenly swelled in a circle. A pair of red eyes, staring at Endless. The reason why he will do something to Endless is entirely because of his competitive spirit. After all, the current Hulk has an IQ of only a few years old and far from being mature. And now after being beaten by Endless, the Hulk has developed 10 out of 10 hostile feelings towards the former. Boom. Next second, the Hulk roared with force, and his entire huge body suddenly jumped up. In a few jumps, he had already arrived in front of Endless. In the sky, General Ross on a gunship has been watching everything that happens on the ground. His eyes, which exuded a sense of vicissitudes, were always on Endless' body. General Ross looked at the yellow-skinned boy who looked on the surface, but was completely no different from an ordinary teenager. His eyes suddenly showed a strong interest. Hulk, on the other hand, builds up with anger. 39. If you don't directly bombard him, the battle after that will become more and more difficult. How far can you resist, and how long can you last? He couldn't help but have such curiosity in his heart. Look but at this time. Rumble. The Hulk rushed not far from Endless and burst out his strongest power again. Both feet suddenly stomped on the ground, the thigh muscles suddenly expanded, and it was a bang, and it flew directly to an altitude of nearly 100 meters. Then he raised his fists, his eyes were full of fierceness, and he roared and smashed down towards Endless. The entire behemoth body, at this moment, looked like a terrifying green shooting star. As the Hulk landed, the endless air currents around him were violently pulled by his huge size. A mighty wind has formed. Endless raised his head, looked at him, and suddenly narrowed his eyes. Hulk, this guy, after being beaten by me, his strength has become stronger again. I'm afraid that if he fights again, he will not be his opponent anymore. This is Hulk's most terrifying bloodline. As the anger deepens, the power can grow indefinitely. This is also the main reason why Endless just retracted his strength to fight him. For fear of killing the other party, you will not be able to copy the other party's ability in the end. Endless pondered. A terrifying air pressure suddenly fell on his head. Hulk. But Hulk, who jumped into the air, had already fallen above his head at this time. Rumble. Next second, The Hulk's behemoth body of more than several tons smashed down with a bang. The terrifying power, like a meteorite hitting the Earth, suddenly exploded from the position of the impact. Everything around shook violently with this impact. The already fragmented ground has become even more chaotic. The wind and waves formed by the strong air current, carrying countless gravel and smoke, spread out towards the surroundings. Endless thick dust and fog rise, straight into the clouds, like wolf smoke. Boom! Those buildings that were already full of cracks and crumbling were blown into pieces and collapsed after the wind and waves swept in. Ripples visible to the naked eye are constantly rippling and swaying in the air. Just a collision from the Hulk, the ground within a radius of 1,000 meters was as if it had been washed by a terrifying bomb, and everything turned into shatter. You can't find the bustling streets of the past again. Tony Stark stood not far away, looking through the mask, looking at the constantly churning dust and fog in front of him, and narrowed his eyes slightly. J.R.V.I.S, scanning the survival of those involved. 35. He couldn't help but give an order towards the artificial intelligence butler. Tony Stark remembered the scene that had just happened in his mind, and the corners of his eyes kept beating. He tried to imagine if he was standing in Endless' position to meet the Hulk's bombardment. What will be the result for yourself? Will die? The question just gave birth in his heart, and there was an answer. The Hulk's smashing blow was too terrifying. Tony Stark simply estimated the reaction of all the surrounding environment at the moment. He thought that even if he was wearing a steel battle suit, it would be completely impossible to withstand it. In his opinion, even if the kid named Endless has extraordinary strength, but no matter what, after facing this, I am afraid it will be difficult to survive. So, Tony Stark made the move to let the artificial intelligence J.R.V.I.S scan the casualties on the scene. Sir, no casualties were detected. Then J.R.V.I.S signature emotionless electronic synthesis sound, by Tony Stark whispered in his ear and gave the answer. Just now, Endless didn't die. 39. Hasn't even weakened its vitality, hasn't it been injured? 35. Tony who got the answer. Stark frowned, his eyes flickered, and he was surprised. He looked up at the thick fog that was still billowing and churning, and his heart was at a loss. Endless, really survived. If it weren't for Tony Stark has enough trust in the artificial intelligence JARVIS. Otherwise, after getting such an answer, he would even wonder if J.R.V.I.S had failed. And now? Surprised. Tony. In the back of Stark's heart, there is a huge amount of question, how did Endless survive? Then the thick dust and fog that rose between heaven and earth began to gradually become thinner. He saw the scene inside the dust and fog clearly. Thereinto, the two figures were bathed in dust and mist, standing opposite each other. One of the slender figures just stretched out one hand to catch the two huge fists on the opposite side. Moreover, there is a large depression in the ground under your feet. Caught it? Tony. Stark's voice trembled when he saw this, and he almost wondered if there was something wrong with his eyes. Take another look. There are no mistakes. Endless, unexpectedly, with only one hand, caught the Hulk's terrifying blow that seemed to destroy the world. Right in Tony. Stark was in utter shock. Next second, in the dust and fog, the slender figure slowly raised his hand, and the huge figure on the opposite side was easily pulled with the former's hand. No resistance, feet off the ground. Rumble. Endless held the Hulk's hand, and with only one hand, he easily shook the latter's entire behemoth body. Smashed to the ground again. The ground trembled violently, and it directly collapsed into a large pit with a diameter of several meters. Roar. Hulk smashed to the ground, suddenly screaming in pain, and his hands tried to break free. But he found that Endless' arm that was as slender as his fingers was like the hardest steel, and it was unshakable. Even the muscles of the Hulk's whole body have completely expanded at this time, and the blood on the surface of the body is gushing. Exhausted all efforts. Still to no avail. He couldn't get out of Endless' control at all. Ah! Yes. Hulk, who felt this, began to roar wildly. The strength in the body, the muscles of the body, are also increasing wildly with the continuous rise of anger. Followed by Endless shook his entire body again, changed directions, and smashed it on the ground. Rumble. The ground shook violently, and it was once again smashed into a deep and wide hole by the Hulk's behemoth body. You! Hulk roared again, his eyes already dyed crimson with anger. The power in the body is growing wildly again. The muscles are expanding bigger and bigger. Then the next second. Rumble. Endless picked up the other party's huge body and began to smash it into the ground in different directions. Suddenly, the earth trembled violently without stopping. Roar. Countless strong winds are constantly sweeping and raging because of the Hulk's huge body, in the constantly movement. Ah! Yes! The Hulk endured one impact after another, the anger in his heart became heavier and heavier, and his strength grew wildly. Row is so. But he didn't feel the slightest chance that he had a chance to break free from Endless' hands. The Hulk was so played by Endless without any backhand. I don't know how many times it hit. The ground around Endless has been smashed by himself for several meters. That's when the Hulk was thrown out. Boom boom. The Hulk flew all the way out, destroying a building again, maiming and splashing. Roar. However, the Hulk, who was hit hard, did not flinch, but became more and more angry in his heart, making him stronger and stronger. He quickly got up, roared and rushed towards Endless again. In the sky. General Ross saw this scene and said in a deep voice, "It seems that this yellow-skinned young man, although he can suppress Hulk for a short time, there is no way to kill him." Speaking, he shook his head, "In this way, this young man also takes this green monster, there is nothing he can do. After all, the more Hulk fights, the more angry and powerful he becomes." The voice just fell. Bang! On the ground, the Hulk has already picked up a boulder and threw it at Endless. Endless watched the boulder break through the air, his face expressionless, his eyes shining red. Boom! The crimson beam swept over, and the boulder suddenly exploded into powder. Then. Battle detected, get reward, Hulk bloodline, Hulk. After successive stimuli. Endless finally successfully copied to the other party's bloodline. It's not easy. He beamed and muttered. Roar. 5. Unfortunately, he didn't wait for him to feel the wonders of the Hulk's bloodline. Not far away. Abomination also crawled out of the ruins, his eyes locked on Endless, as if he regarded the latter as a target for killing. Roar. Boy, wait to die. 35. Roar. Time. The two big guys rushed towards Endless at the same time. Since I have copied to bloodline ability, then I will not be polite. Endless didn't panic at all, and even wanted to laugh. Next second. Boom! Two big guys just rushed in front of him, and Endless blasted out in 2 circles. The ground trembled, and the wind swelled. The Hulk and the Abomination were actually blasted out without any resistance at the same time. Damn! Tony Stark watched the Hulk fly towards him, his face changed, and he cursed secretly. "Sir, the restoration is complete." Fortunately, the voice of J.R.V.I.S sounded at the right time, indicating that the battlesuit power transmission was repaired. Tony Stark immediately didn't hesitate, prompting the engine to fly into the air, narrowly avoiding the smash. Rumble. The Hulk crashed to the ground and smashed into the air, only to fall on the ruins, stirring up smoke and dust. Tony Stark looked at this scene and was shocked under his eyes. Meanwhile, S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Nick Fury looked at this scene, his eyes were cloudy and complicated. Both the Hulk and the Abomination made him feel jealous. And Endless can actually abuse the two of them with only one person. The other side. New York Square. Damn. The Abomination that was smashed into the distance by the bombardment, roared and was the first to get up, and launched another offensive with a fierce expression rather unconvinced. The ground shook suddenly. The Abomination rushed to Endless' size in an instant. Endless looked at each other, his eyes indifferent. In this way, the desired ability has been copied almost the same. He had no extra mind and continued to play. "You damn it!" Endless whispered, reaching out to easily catch the huge arm that swung towards him in Abomination. Boom! 5 fingers to power. Like pinching a deadwood branch, it easily bursts a hated forearm. The membrane ruptured, and countless red muscles and white tendons all popped out. There was also a huge amount of sticky and fishy blood gushing out. Severe pain came. The gigantic Abomination felt the intense pain and threw his head back with a deafening roar. The huge sound wave generated by the roar rippled outwards and spread throughout North New York City. Roar. 35. The Abomination mixed with the roar of extreme pain reverberated back and forth in the night sky of New York City after nightfall. Even if you just listen to the sound, you can feel the pain he is experiencing now. Damn it! Gritting his teeth in disgust, he raised his eyes and looked at Endless in front of him. He originally wanted to explode, but the moment he met the other party's eyes, his entire behemoth body trembled unconsciously. What kind of eyes are they? Indifferent, overlook, high above. Rao no longer has much reason, all thoughts are occupied by war intent and anger and hatred. When facing this pair of eyes, there is a great fear in his heart, rushing up, instantly occupying all thoughts. You damn it! He recalled what Endless had just said. Once again, the previous hatred only felt that the other party was just provoking himself. Looking back now, I don't feel that there are any emotional fluctuations in it. It sounds like it's just a calm statement of a fact. Spare me. Hate to open the mouth, in the hideous mouth parts covered with dense fangs, this time actually spat out words begging for mercy. Pity. It's a pity. Endless shook his head lightly when he heard this. A few simple words fell into the ears of Abomination, but like a few sharp spikes, they were inserted into the heart. Burst. More than Endless words. After he said those words, the young man with indifferent eyes had already stretched out his hands and easily inserted them into the chest that hated the Abomination that could not even be penetrated by bullets. No. The hatred body shook, felt a huge amount of pain spread throughout his body instantly, and wanted to continue to beg for mercy. Pity. the words are not finished. Peril. Endless hands inserted into the opponent's chest suddenly split to the sides. Hate the body covered with spikes, which was deeply torn in half. All the membranes, muscles, and bones that should have been extremely tough could not resist endless movements. Sticky and fishy blood, mixed with countless strangely shaped internal organs, rushed out and splashed to the ground. Endless casually threw the two halves of the behemoth body in his hand to the ground. His expression was still calm and did not fluctuate in the slightest, as if he had just torn open an insignificant piece of white paper. He was standing there. Because of his biological position, all the blood and slime did not contaminate him. On both sides of the body were the hateful corpses that had been torn in half. Blood soaked the internal organs all over the ground, mixed with other colorful unknown liquids, emitting a strong stench into the air. Now at this time, it has completely fallen into a dead silence. Everyone's eyes looking at Endless were full of shock and disbelief. "Sir, it has been detected that the living form abomination has died." 35. Tony. Stark stood stunned in place, listening to the sound of J.R.V.I.S in his ears, and his expression under the mask had long since fallen into sluggishness. Although I have not experienced it myself, I can draw at least one conclusion from all the manifestations of the surrounding environment. The power that Endless just erupted is unpredictable. Far from the power that Superman can withstand. Even before, none of the known life forms on Earth could possess such power. This guy is simply a walking nuclear weapon. Tony. Stark's thoughts progressed here, and he couldn't help but be startled and muttered. Stopped in a car on the side of the road in the distance. Endless, this freak. Logan was in the driver's seat, watching this scene from afar, and couldn't help but curse in a low voice. Others may not know. But as the person who is most familiar with Endless, Logan knows how long it took for the former to reach this point. Endless, it's scary. Pete of the latter was so frightened that he curled up with his head in his hands, shivering. Wanda and Laura, on the other hand, both huddled in front of the car window, looking at Endless with bright eyes, feeling safe. Endless' variant ability is the strongest I have ever seen. Charles on the side also looked a little surprised, and couldn't help but sigh. After 2 days away, has the variant ability been strengthened to this point? Except for them. General Ross in a helicopter, and Nick in SHIELD. Fury was even more shocked when he saw Endless' performance. As government personnel, they naturally know how terrifying the abomination of body density is. That's an existence that can't even be penetrated by armor-piercing shells. Actually torn by hand just like that. How terrifying is Endless' power? Moreover, just now he obviously has not reached his limit, and the whole process seems relaxed. And what is his limit? It's just certain that ordinary thermal weapons are far from threatening him. How exactly is this monster made? General Ross was in the sky, looking at Endless from a distance. His eyes were full of frenzy. Although the mutant in the world today has been reduced to experimental subjects, for General Ross, those mutant experimental subjects are too weak. After seeing the Hulk's terrifying power, he wants to get stronger. And at the moment, a stronger presence than the Hulk is just around the corner. The other side. Nick in the office of the director within SHIELD. Fury, already couldn't help but stand up. Eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. His mood was very different from Ross's. Nick Fury has listed Endless as a danger that must be dealt with. It's just that after seeing the strength of Endless' true strength at the moment, he suddenly realized that if he wanted to deal with the other party, he had to think long-term. With the strength that Endless is showing now, conventional means will definitely not work for him. Come to think of it, Nick. Fury couldn't help but clench his fists. Then, in footage captured from other cameras, he accidentally saw Charles in the car. Look at this mutant, which is listed as the same threat as nuclear weapons. A dark light flashed under Nick Fury's eyes, his eyes narrowed slightly, and he didn't know what he was thinking. Raw, 39. Then, the Hulk's angry roar suddenly came from the screen, drawing his attention back to the main screen. I saw Hulk stand up from the ruins again, shaking dust, and his hands pounding his chest with great momentum. Raw. 99. He yelled and wanted to keep fighting. But when his gaze swept over the shredded abomination, he was directly stunned in place. Before hating, it was inseparable from him. How did it become such a ghost in the blink of an eye? Just as Hulk's movements gradually slowed down, he noticed Endless, who was standing on the abomination of flesh and blood, and slowly raised his head. A calm and indifferent gaze was projected towards himself. In those deep black eyes, there is clearly no extreme emotion, but it is extremely intimidating. Being targeted by it completely gives people a sense of crushing from the dimension of life. Just looking at it made the Hulk feel creepy. The Hulk's roar stopped abruptly. The raised hands softened. The ferocity in his eyes also gradually collapsed. He felt a certain fear deep in his marrow, as if a weak little animal saw the fear of an invincible predator and engulfed him in an instant. Roar. Subsequently, after the Hulk actually let out a low roar, he turned around and ran without hesitation, fast as the wind. A pair of big feet trembled when they stepped on the ground at a very fast frequency. The behemoth body disappeared into the darkness in the blink of an eye. Is that instigated? Endless looked at the direction in which the other party disappeared and shook his head speechlessly. I didn't expect to be convinced by Hulk so easily. But now that the ability that should be copied has almost been copied, he didn't bother to chase, and suddenly raised his footsteps and walked towards Logan's parking spot. On a gunship. General Ross was stunned when he saw this scene, and his eyes widened in shock. This is running. Invincible, the extremely violent Hulk. When facing the enemy, he didn't even have the courage to continue to shoot, turn around and run. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but have a strange expression on his face. Before, they captured Hulk, but they don't know how many men they paid and sacrificed a lot of soldiers. However, the other party has always maintained an invincible posture and does not pay attention to the army led by Ross at all. And now, such a Hulk is actually directly scared away. General, do you want to chase? The subordinates on the side also came back to their senses after a brief sluggishness. General Ross looked at the pleading in the eyes of his daughter Betty next to him, sighed and waved his hand, signaling that there was no need to chase. Let's land first, I have something to say to the young man. He said immediately. The voice is over. The helicopter gunship he was riding in immediately leaned over to Logan's parking position and landed slowly. And Tony Stark also controlled the steel battle suit at this time and flew towards Endless. Something. Endless looked down at the helicopter, General Ross, who came with a smile, and asked in a deep voice. Although I don't know what the other party really wants, he has the confidence to face everything that may happen in front of him at this moment. Can I know who you really are? This friend. Although Ross wanted Endless to come straight to his research, thinking of the other party's terrible strength, he had to try to make him seem friendly. next to Tony. Stark was also curious about it. After just now, he had understood that Endless was not just Mr. Wilson's partner. Rose, I know what you're thinking. But I warn you, this guy is Endless, an extremely dangerous mutant, and hostile to officials. At this time, Nick. Fury's voice suddenly sounded from Ross's headphones. The latter's face instantly changed when he heard these words, and his gaze looking at Endless suddenly became a little shocked. Standing on the opposite side, Endless, his five senses naturally heard Nick Fury's voice. So he smiled and said, "He's right, I'm mutant. Your military had better not provoke me at will, otherwise there is no guarantee that something will happen." 5. Next to Tony. When Stark heard this, his brows raised slightly. "I didn't expect to meet Mutant again." The tone of his voice was not the slightest repulsion, just a little surprised. After all, for so many years, the government has been saying that Mutant has gradually disappeared from the world, and today it can actually meet one. "Tony, stay away from him." General Ross looked solemn, unconsciously took a step back, and at the same time glanced at Tony, who was still approaching. "Stark. Remind out loud. I'm not an expert in sociology, and I don't think Endless is hostile." Tony. Stark spread out his hands, and the battlesuit mask opened at the same time, revealing a handsome face with a beard. He looked at Endless and said with a smile on his face, "To be honest, Endless, I am very interested in having an in-depth exchange with you. I always thought you would be a funny friend." Tony of this period. Stark hasn't experienced much yet, and Ren is a playful playboy in the face of a lot of things. Endless smiled when he heard this. As the person who knows the other person best, he knows that he is telling the truth, and if conditions permit, Endless is also willing to make friends with Iron Man. But right now, it's obviously not a good time. "We can talk when we have time, but for now, I'm going back to rest." With that, Endless nodded in greeting, then turned around and prepared to leave. "Endless, you stand for me." Seeing this, General Ross looked anxious and took 2 steps forward to stop someone. Whether the other party is mutant or something else, the terrifying power of his body is real. It's also something he's after. Obviously being so close to him, but letting the other party leave directly did make General Ross a little difficult to accept. "Ross, I warn you that it's best not to do anything with Endless." But before he finished speaking, Nick came from the headphones again. Fury's somber voice. Hearing this reminder, Ross woke up like a dream and remembered the scene where Endless had just shown his strength. "Damn, what did I almost do?" Ross came to his senses, looked at his daughter and other comrades on the gunship behind him, and suddenly felt that his body was a little stiff, and his whole body was soaked in cold sweat. Endless is a capable and abhorrent existence. If they really provoke him, the other party wants to destroy all the military people present, but it is only a matter of raising their hands. Luckily Nick Fury pulled himself in time as he walked to the edge of the cliff. Come to think of it. A trace of bitterness and helplessness suddenly appeared on Ross's face, and he could only stand in place, watching Endless, who made his heart move, and gradually moved away after getting in the car. A long time later, General Ross blew the night breeze and couldn't help but let out a long sigh. "Nick Fury, you just said that this Endless is hostile to the official people." 35. Then US.H.I.E.L.D. are not going to leave him alone. He opened his mouth to Nick on the other end of the headphones. Fury asked. S.H.I.E.L.D, as a special unit specializing in dealing with various strange events, as Mutants Endless, is naturally within their scope of handling. But before Nick Fury replied, General Ross shook his head to himself, but I think it is also, according to the strength that this Endless has just shown, I am afraid that if he does not use heavy weapons, he will not be able to deal with him at all. Even if Lee's heavy weapons are dispatched, they are not necessarily his opponents. It should be tricky for US.H.I.E.L.D, right? The voice is over. Nick over there in the headphones. Fury was silent for a while before replying, we had already been in contact with him before. And it also paid a heavy price. But I won't let him go. When General Ross heard this, he said in a heavy tone, apart from nuclear weapons, can there really be something to deal with him? The price to pay for the use of nuclear weapons is too great, and it is clearly not worth dealing with a mutant. Finish talking. He waited a long time, and he didn't wait for Nick Fury's answer. General Ross cares about everything. After all, he himself knows this question and it is difficult to answer. After forgetting the direction in which Endless had left, he returned to the gunship. Let someone come and collect the abomination corpse, and then let's go back, General Ross said to his subordinates. Subsequently, the gunship started again and lifted off to leave the other side. S.H.I.E.L.D Triboloid Wing Building. Inside the director's office, Nick Fury looked at the file and an old photo in his hand and fell into a long silence. The photo is an old Xavier Academy photo. It was also Charles, who bought a photo with the first X-Men. His gaze was on Charles' smiling face, and he paused for a moment. Nick Fury opened the back of the photo, which had the words brainwave strengthening written on it, and the photo was found in the archive room last night. SHIELD, as the Bureau of Homeland Strategic Defense and Logistics, has been in contact with Mutant X-Men, Xavier Academy. And to control their every move is to better control this race. Therefore, he also knows the secrets that Charles hides in the basement of the college. Can only nuclear weapons be used against Endless? Nick Fury touched the handwriting and muttered, other methods, don't try how to know if it works. Night falls. On the sky without clouds and moons, it is difficult to find shining stars. Because New York City is one of the most prosperous cities in the world. Every night, the light pollution caused by the bright lights makes people on the ground look up into the deep space, but it is difficult to find the stars. Endless. Logan grasped the steering wheel, and Yu Guang paid attention to the teenager on the side, wanting to stop talking. Logan, just say whatever you want. Endless tilted his head and smiled. He wanted to say that it would get better and better in the future, and I felt that way. Charles in the back row laughed. Endless, you are so strong. I feel that as long as I have you by my side now, I don't have to worry about anything. Wanda also had a smile on her face, like a porcelain doll's delicate little face, with a blush that appeared from excitement. I think so too. Laura pursed her small mouth, her words changing more and more. Only Pete seemed to have been immersed in the image of Endless' hand-tearing abomination, unable to extricate himself and dare not look up. Ha! Let's hope it's not an illusion. Logan listened to their words, and his laughter was a little complicated. Relax, I promised that everything would only get better. Endless heard the worry hidden in the conversation, knew that Wolverine had been through many good times, and then watched everything shatter. So he said in relief. And he is so convinced. With Endless' current strength, he can already do a lot of things. That's it. While talking, the group soon returned to Drenched Manor. The others were too tired to go back and eat something simply, and then went back to rest. Endless leaned on telepathy and found that everyone fell asleep quickly after returning to their rooms. Maybe I'm too tired tonight. Endless smiled. Speaking of which, he has experienced too many things within today. Even when he just came out of the playground, he was so tired that he fell asleep. It's just that now he is extremely spiritual, and he doesn't have much sleep. I'm getting stronger again. 5. Endless muttered with a smile. Then the mind moved, and the panel was summoned. There are a lot of abilities on the panel at the moment. These include 2 super strengths, Hulk the Hulk and Abomination. There is also super speed. Definitely. One of the most important gains is the Hulk bloodline. This bloodline also has a bloodline that can increase his power indefinitely, which makes Endless feel very satisfied. After a little feeling 520 should be. Endless also accidentally found that the Hulk bloodline and Kryptonian bloodline he got, 2 different bloodlines, did not conflict with each other. Moreover, like other abilities, they are the same bloodline, and there is a superposition effect between them. The improvement brought by the 2 bloodlines is carried out at the same time. And when the Hulk's bloodline brings anger, the drawback of losing his mind due to the battle spirit is also gone. Maybe it's because of the Krypton bloodline, only the good part of the bloodline is preserved. Endless looked at the palm of his hand and sighed in surprise. He can clearly perceive that his body is getting bigger and bigger. Not only now, but presumably from now on, Clark will be crushed by me. Endless suddenly thought of Clark's stubborn face, and suddenly a smug smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Previously, Endless relied on Wolverine and Clark, and the super strength superposition he got had already overwhelmed the big super. And now, he has also gained 2 super strengths. It can be said that the current Dakeo is far inferior to Endless in terms of strength. And about the potential of the future. Although it also has an infinite evolutionary bloodline with no upper limit. However, the Keo Clark only has Krypton bloodline, a separate bloodline. And I, on the other hand, have both Kryptonian bloodline and Hulk bloodline. In terms of the speed of strength growth, there are 2 bloodlines of blessing, which are also faster than the Keo. Unless something unexpected happens in the future, the gap between me and the Keo will become bigger and bigger. Endless muttered, the light in his eyes brightening brighter. Then, the sound of vehicle engines was heard outside the manor. At night, a black extended Lincoln slowly drove into the manor and soon came to a stop at the door of the villa. A tall and burly figure dressed in a white suit got out of the car, walked to the door and knocked on it. Endless, I'm Gingy, I have something to talk to you about. 35. Jin said in a deep voice. Come in. Endless had already arrived in the hall when he sensed the vehicle coming. He watched him walk in the door with an expressionless face, and did Gingy next to him, his eyes narrowed unconsciously. Endless could sense that the other party's mood seemed to be somewhat unstable, with all the gloom and irritability. What's the matter with coming here so late? He asked directly. When Jin heard this, his expression became more gloomy, and his slightly closed eyes flashed with displeasure. I've sent someone to bring back those you said. 39. It's just that it cost a lot. When he said this, Ada turned his head to stare into Endless' eyes, his brows furrowed slightly. Endless, You didn't tell me that those people are mutant. Their resistance led to the death of several of my people, and coupled with the border police pursuit, it almost made me show my stuffing. Jin said a lot in one breath. His words were fierce, and the dissatisfaction in his heart was obvious. Whatever the reason, he was willing to trust Endless. But I didn't expect that when the latter let himself do things, he would hide such an important matter from Mutant. This distrust, coupled with the fact that interests are indeed threatened, makes him very sad. So after the completion of what Endless confessed, he immediately went to the other party and explained the situation. As long as you do what I say, there will be no problems with our cooperation. Endless looked at Jinjeng and said without hurry. He noticed that the latter had once again developed a little hostility towards himself because of this incident. Then he added, "Do you think that the lives of a few of your subordinates cannot be exchanged for your family?" 35. Kim fell silent when he heard this. I feel that Endless' words are very reasonable. As long as you can get back your family, these costs are nothing now. Besides, that's what he thought. That's why I complained when I brought back the group of little mutants and fulfilled Endless' instructions. Although Jin Yuan was a little dissatisfied in his heart, he had no doubt that Endless could resurrect his family. I still need you to do the next thing for me. Endless continued. Jin on the opposite side heard this, just nodded but felt inexplicably resistant. Endless glanced at him, and his heart was activated, erasing the other party's feelings about himself because of the affairs of the little mutants. Next second, Jin nodded without hesitation, and his face was even a little excited. "Yes, I have no problem if you need anything. As long as you get my family back. Say, what do you want me to do next?" Endless then said, "I need you to go to the south coast, find some people who live at the bottom of the sea, and then tell me the clues." 35. South coast, people who live under the sea. Jin was a little puzzled when he heard Endless' request, but didn't say much. Even realized that the person he asked him to find this time was also not a simple human being. But he still nodded without hesitation. "Okay, I know, you can wait for my good news." Then, Jin continued, "What about those little mutants who just came back? You first arrange a place for them to live without contact with other people, and then I will go to them." Endless said. "Okay, listen to you." 35. Kim nodded in response. Then they didn't stop too long and left the villa where Endless was staying. This mental ability is really perverted. Endless looked at the other parties departing back and smiled. It is so simple to make a person obey his words. Mumbled. He later realized that his spiritual ability seemed to be much stronger, and there was a tendency to become stronger. Maybe it's related to the Krypton bloodline. Mind ability plus the super brain that comes with Krypton's bloodline is naturally a big bonus. It's all good anyway. Thinking. Endless stood up, stretched and turned into the room, ready to rest. Although his body does not feel tired, after experiencing so many things one after another, his spirit needs to be slowed down. The other side. This Endless, still don't believe me. Still don't tell me what his purpose is in doing these things. Jin returned to the car, constantly venting his dissatisfaction with Endless. Tell yourself nothing. Where is this like treating him as a partner? It's all about using servants. However, although Jin was complaining in his mouth, he had already begun to think in his mind at the same time, what Endless gave him next, and what preparations he should make in order to do it for him. "Boss, I think you'll want to see this." Then, The assistant on the side turned his head and handed over a tablet. When Jin heard this, he looked over, and his face suddenly changed. What is displayed on the tablet is the image of Endless's forehand-tearing abomination. This Endless actually has such ability. Jin was surprised and happy for a while, and his expression was extremely complicated. He was shocked by Endless's strength, and at the same time he was afraid that he had just done nothing to offend the latter. Otherwise, I will fall into the same way as that monster and be torn by my hands. Furthermore, Kim also had some anticipation and joy. I feel that after doing everything with all my heart, Endless will definitely keep his promise. Time passes slowly. The night was getting darker and darker. The whole of Washington fell silent, except for a few buildings that shimmered. And the S.H.I.E.L.D. Triboloid building is still brightly lit. All up and down are always running. Inside the director's office, Nick Fury sat solemnly in his chair and looked at the TV hanging in front of him. It is broadcasting the horror that happened in the back of New York City at 8 o'clock tonight. Two large men fought fiercely in the street. In the end, the mysterious man intervened, and everything was stopped. However, the official name of the man was not disclosed. Then, knock knock. There was a knock on the door. Hill Agent, who has short-cut hair, and Black Widow Natasha Romanoff, who has bumpy lines, and Clint, who has a bumpy line. Barton walked in one after another. Everything is starting to get worse and worse. 1. Nick Fury turned off the TV with a slight atmosphere. Tonight Endless shot in public, and it won't be long before someone knows that there is a dangerous mutant in New York City. 99. Hill Agent took a deep breath, his blue eyes shining with seriousness. By that time, the whole of New York City will be in a panic. Natasha Romanoff on the side tilted her head. Endless said that as long as you don't mess with him easily, you will be fine. But Phil Coulson died, at the hands of that damned mutant. Nick Fury looked at Natasha Romanoff and narrowed his eyes. Hearing this, Natasha Romanoff sighed against the other party's gaze, and said helplessly, so his task, who gave the order? Anyway, now we S.H.I.E.L.D. have been forced to stand on the opposite side of Endless. Originally, no one wanted to see such a thing happen. She spread her hands, and what she said clearly meant something. Boom. Nick Fury stood up, slammed his hands on the tabletop, his eyelids twitching as if suppressing anger, and stared at Natasha Romanoff. Natasha Romanoff stared at each other's gaze and picked her fair chin, unconcerned. It's just that the atmosphere in the office is beginning to look tense. Hill Agent looked at Nick Fury, looking at Natasha Romanoff again, wanted to say something, but didn't know how. Long. Nick Fury took a deep breath and sat back in his chair. Endless affairs, I'll deal with it. 35. After the voice fell, Natasha Romanoff raised an eyebrow and didn't say anything more. As for the other two, facing the director, they didn't know what to say. The office suddenly fell silent again. After a while, Nick Fury took another deep breath and said with a serious expression, Hill and Barton, I need you to take someone to Xavier Academy next. 39. Find out the brainwave strengthening machine that Professor X hid in the basement before. When Hill and Hawkeye heard this, they immediately reacted. Nick Fury was going to use that machine against Mutant. Endless, the dangerous mutant, shows too strong strength. This idea of yours is a good way. Hawkeye thought about it and nodded and said, However, this machine needs a mutant like Charles to use. Now we don't have such people in SHIELD. As for Charles, endless people are on his side. They won't come to help us. Agent Hill was quick to voice his concerns. I have to say that it was precisely because of her meticulous thinking that she was able to successfully take over the position of S.H.I.E.L.D. speaker. Don't worry, I'll fix it. Nick. Fury heard the other party's concerns and said firmly. It's just that he doesn't plan to explain what he will do next. Seeing this, Hill and Hawkeye couldn't keep asking. Just said in unison, received. So what is my mission? 35. Natasha Romanov asked after listening to the other two's tasks. All three of them were all made by Nick. Fury called over, everyone naturally has a task. Nick. Fury glanced at her, took a document from under the table, and placed it on it. There is a line of words written on the document, Project Avengers. I met Captain Marvel many years ago, and she's a special person who has been through a lot. 35. Nick. Fury said slowly, and it was from then on that I realized that we humans must have a crisis that is strong enough to deal with the extraracial race. With that, he raised his eyes and looked at the three people in front of him. Obviously, now that the crisis has come, I have to do something in advance. Subsequently, Nick. Fury set his sights on Natasha Romanov. Tomorrow you and I will go to Tony Stark, let him join the Avengers program. 5. Project Avenger. When Natasha Romanov heard this, she couldn't help but mutter. Nick. Fury nodded, I'll tell you more about it tomorrow before I leave. Subsequently, Nick, who has completed all the tasks. Fury asked a few people to leave first. The office fell silent again. Nick. Fury sat down in his chair, took out the red and blue BB machine with the Captain Marvel logo, and fell silent. The fingers rubbed on the BB machine for a long time, and then slowly put it away. He would never use it unless he had to. Captain Marvel is the last whole card in his hand when he reaches a desperate situation and cannot retreat. Fast forward to the night. Next. When heaven and earth converge and the first rays of morning sunlight appear, Endless is already up. He stood on the balcony, closed his eyes and spread his arms, feeling the sunlight shining. The early morning sun carries almost no temperature. But shining on Endless, for a while, he had the feeling of soaking in a hot spring with a suitable temperature. The cells all over his body seemed to be excited at this moment, and constantly became active. You don't even have to do anything deliberately, just stand in the sun. His body will automatically begin to absorb the energy in the sunlight. It's a wonderful feeling. After Endless received the Kryptonian bloodline, the sun was given a new meaning to him. That's where the power comes from. At this moment, he is bathed in sunlight, and all the cells in his body are constantly absorbing the energy from the fixed star, dividing and growing constantly at a very fast speed. The fixed star energy transmitted through sunlight is stored in the muscles. Not only can he never catch up with hunger, but it is also changing his body. It's a good feeling of increasing power. Endless raised his hand and clenched his fist. He could feel his own strength, and every minute was getting stronger. He can clearly feel the changes in the body's epithelium, muscles, bones, and internal organs. As the cells divided, his body density tightened constantly, and the frenzied arrangement and reorganization was a vast evolution from the basis of life. At the same time, the amount of solar energy absorbed into the body begins to become purer with the transformation of the body, and becomes more and more intense under the refining and compression. Instead of saying that absorbing fixed star energy is the cornerstone of Kryptonian evolution, it is better to say that fixed star energy is the catalyst for the entire evolutionary process. Endless noticed the direction of physical energy and suddenly felt this way. In fact, becoming stronger originally comes from the potential of the Krypton bloodline, and the sun's illumination merely provides kinetic energy, speeding up the process. And the ability absorbed into the body will be increased, that is, the previous obtained refinement is more refined. Just a wisp of fixed star energy into the body will be immediately stimulated, strengthening. And this increases as the body strengthens, and the effect is constantly. This is an important reason why Superman can surpass the universe originally. Endless sighed. Looking up, I found that the sun at the skyline had completely jumped above the ground level, and the hole was exposed there. The projected sunlight gradually blazed. The faster Endless bathes his body, the faster he absorbs the sun's rays, the faster he becomes stronger. Be aware of this. He suddenly lifted his feet off the ground and flew towards the rising sun. I'm getting stronger. Endless muttered as he closed his eyes and opened his arms, allowing his body to receive as much sunlight as possible. The fixed starlight that crossed the universe, passed through the atmosphere, and shone on his body. The energy contained in it was quickly absorbed by his body. Penetrates between cells. All the cells were more excited, energy absorbing, crazy strengthening Endless' body. Epithelium, muscles, bones, internal organs. Everything is at this time, step towards strength. The aura of the whole person has become more and more powerful. At this time, Endless emitted a wave of energy all over his body, enveloping his whole body, which was a body of steel and a biological stance. He has a beautiful face, fair skin, and a well-proportioned figure, which is the best aesthetic master, and he can't find a single flaw. He stood in the air under a round of the great sun, and a round of gold was outlined around him, exuding bursts of divine majesty. Looking at the past from afar, it looks like a god rather than a man. Endless himself enjoys this feeling. After a while. Knock knock. Endless heard a knock on his door. Endless, are you up? A timid and soft girl sounded cautiously. It's Wanda. Endless heard her voice, came back to his senses and smiled, then fell back to the balcony and went over to open the door. Good morning, Wanda. He looked at the girl in front of him, whose face was as delicate as a porcelain doll, with a light blush on her cheeks, and smiled and greeted Raw. Good morning, Endless. Wanda met the gentle gaze of the other person, her slender eyelashes twitched, and her sapphire-like eyes sparkled even more. I made breakfast and hope you will try it. The girl spoke slowly, and there was a sense of expectation and nervousness in her words. Well, since Wanda did it, I definitely can't miss it. Endless smiled and touched the girl's head. This Wanda has been very well behaved since the day she saw it, and now after stabilizing, she actually makes a special breakfast, which is indeed surprising. I followed downstairs. All the way to the restaurant. I saw that everyone had already gotten up early and sat down at the table. On the dining table, a steaming Chinese breakfast is freshly prepared. Soy milk, fried sticks, and buns. You did all this. Endless looked at these foods that had been kept in his memory, but had not been eaten for a long time, and raised his eyebrows slightly unexpectedly. I learned it online, I don't know if it can match your taste. Wanda playfully stuck out her tongue and looked at Endless nervously. The latter noticed her gaze, smiled and sat down to take a bun and take a bite, and then said, "Originally, I wanted to say that as long as you do it with your heart, but now I find that my idea is reckless." 55. You made it exactly like what I wanted to eat. Wanda's face suddenly became happy when she heard this. "It's great that you like that. I loved it." Endless smiled and ate all the buns in his hand. Wanda sat down full of joy. "Endless, this guy, coaxing girls really has a hand." Logan smiled ambiguously when he saw this. And when Laura saw this scene, she immediately felt that the fritters in her hand were not fragrant, and her little face fell. Endless noticed this and looked up at her. "Laura, I've asked someone to bring all your friends over. There is time to take you to see them." Laura immediately smiled on her face and couldn't wait. "I'll go after breakfast, is it okay?" 99. Endless thought for a while, and then said apologetically, "Sorry, I still have things to do next, and I don't have time for the time being." 5. If you can't wait, Logan can take you. Logan also knows that Laura's friends are New Mutant and are equally interested in them. He hadn't seen any other mutant in a long time. "I'm okay." "So, the food in Logan's mouth right now said so." "Okay." Laura was visibly displeased, but didn't say much and glanced at Logan. "Then let's go." 99. Although Endless could not go with her, she was a little disappointed, but she still wanted to see her friends, but chose to agree. Neither Charles nor Pete spoke. The former has been silent, his eyes flickering, and he doesn't know what he is thinking. The latter did not dare to speak because of Endless' appearance. Finished breakfast quickly. Endless lay down on a chair by the manor's pool and basked in the sun. It's not that he salts fish. This move is entirely to study the Kryptonian bloodline plus the Hulk bloodline. What will be the difference when it is promoted? Although Endless had already roughly felt it before, the two bloodlines were superimposed on each other in terms of improving the effect. But the specific situation still needs to be carefully understood. This is important. After all, he will get more bloodlines in the future. If all the bloodlines are in conflict with each other, there will be no conflict. Endless felt the sunlight shining and suddenly had an idea. Then I will be strong enough to gather the Superman and Hulk of various universes and set up a breeding farm. Then let the Silver Super versus the Immortal Hulk so that I can brush my ability and bloodline infinitely. Thinking of this, Endless couldn't help but smile and look forward to it slightly. However, he also knew that this idea was just a whim, and it was still too far away. According to the current situation, the safest thing is to go back and forth between the two universes currently determined. After all, he has not been discovered by the existence of high latitudes now, and he will not be accidentally affected. Endless kept thinking. It's been in the sun for hours. During this process, he has been feeling the changes in his body, and at first it is no different from the beginning. All the cells are under the action of the Krypton bloodline, constantly absorbing sunlight and becoming stronger. At the same time, the Hulk bloodline is also working, accelerating this effect. It wasn't until later that he discovered a terrible problem. That is, the cells in the body are becoming more and more active. There would be such an effect, and he could feel it not because of the Krypton bloodline. It's from the Hulk bloodline. It seems that under the influence of the Krypton bloodline, the Hulk bloodline has undergone some kind of abnormality. 35. My life force began to become more and more tenacious at a very fast speed. 5. Endless sensed everything happening and sat up straight. My Hulk bloodline seems a little strange. It seems to be evolving in the direction of some mutation. Endless muttered. He could clearly feel that this abnormality was subtly changed under the influence of Krypton's bloodline, and constantly stimulated every inch of his body. Seem. Active cells gradually have tenacious life. 0. Asking for flowers. 0. They are becoming tenacious and active. Come to think of it. In endless thoughts, a name flashed. Immortal Hulk. He seems a little inclined to that way. Immortal and imperishable. Although the great super bloodline may not be injured in the later stage, no one can guarantee that if it can develop the Hulk bloodline indefinitely, until it reaches the level of Immortal Hulk. That's a good thing too. There seem to be signs of that. Endless continued to pay attention to the changes in the cells in his body for a while, and felt that he had a great chance of approaching the Immortal Hulk. The Kryptonian bloodline is worthy of being an existence with unlimited potential, and it can develop my Hulk bloodline to such a point. His heart was ecstatic. Immortal Hulk. That is the ultimate existence of immortality. Moreover, what also makes Endless happy is that the two bloodlines he holds now not only do not affect each other, but can even promote each other's evolution. This made him look forward to it even more. After me, I will definitely get more blood. 35. If that's the case, the bloodline obtained in the future can even evolve on the original basis. As Endless thoughts progressed, the joy on his face became more and more obvious. He could even imagine the scene when he would harvest the bloodline later. Your bloodline is very good, now I have it. Moreover, the bloodline is in my body, and it can be evolved. Stronger than yours. It's really good. After Endless imagined the scene at that time, the smile on his face became even bigger, and he couldn't help but sigh secretly. 0. And in the process, the two bloodlines in his body are still constantly absorbing sunlight, as well as changing their cell activity and enhancing vitality. All parts of the body, every corner, every second are metamorphosis. Clark can't catch up with me at all. Endless thought confidently, at my current speed, I probably don't have to wait for Thanos to snap his fingers. It won't take long for me to go straight to him and serve them all in the pot. So to speak. Now he is getting stronger even raw. Moreover, this strengthening does not need to be deliberately controlled by him, and all the cells of the body will automatically run and absorb the sun's energy on their own. Endless can become stronger by the way when doing other things. With two bloodlines, he is so terrifying now. Then, Endless ears moved, then he collected his thoughts and looked into the house. Inside the house, Charles was lying on a recliner, quietly watching TV. Next second, boom! A fierce wind swept in, shaking the furniture in the entire house. Endless, you don't have to be in such a hurry if you want to watch TV. You have to take care of the elderly who are not in good spirits and are easily frightened. Charles was taken aback by Endless, who suddenly flashed in front of the TV, and couldn't help sighing, frowning and complaining. And Endless did not reply to his complaints, widened his eyes and looked at the news that was playing on the TV. Last night, New Mexico suffered the fall of an extraterrestrial satellite, and thousands of meters around it were smashed. Fortunately, the meteorite fell in no man's land, and there were no casualties. The female announcer in charge of broadcasting is dressed in a dignified and atmospheric manner, and broadcasts the news in a rounded manner. That's the picture taken on site. Then, as the picture begins, the announcer raises her hand. A photo suddenly appeared on TV. When Endless saw this photo, his eyes couldn't help but light up, coming. Seeing that the scene that emerged in that photo was a plane hit by a meteorite. The surrounding ground was impacted, and a deep pit was blasted out, and the black soil was turned over. And in the center of that deep pit, stands a silver hammer full of patterns. Engineer. Endless naturally recognized the hammer, and a strong expectation suddenly appeared in his eyes. Thor is coming to Earth. He thought of the bloodline that belongs to Thor, but is also the deity's bloodline, which can grow infinitely in power over time. The expectation in my heart is more and more uncontrollable. At the moment, he already has 2 bloodlines that can increase his strength indefinitely. If you get your hands on Thor's Asgard bloodline, that's the Kryptonian bloodline, plus the Hulk bloodline, plus the Asgard bloodline. Suck. Thinking of this possibility, Rao Endless had to take a deep breath to calm down his expectant mood. If the 3 bloodlines are all gathered in me, what kind of effect will it have? He muttered. Is it super doubled? That's it guys, hope you like this video. Like, share and subscribe the channel if you want more videos like this. Also tell me in the comment section down below if you have any recommendation about what I should make next. Thanks for watching.